Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is James Anderson, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the spring of 2023, deep in the Humboldt-Toyabe National Forest of Nevada. The nightmares haven't stopped since. I'd always been an outdoorsman, but after my divorce from Elena, I needed more than just weekend hikes. I needed to disappear, to find something real in the wilderness that might fill the hollowness her leaving had carved inside me. That's why I decided on a 2-week solo backpacking trip through some of Nevada's most remote terrain. The Humboldt-Toyabe is the largest national forest in the lower 48 states. Over 6 million acres of mountains, canyons, and forests where cell reception disappears and you can go days without seeing another human being. Perfect for someone like me who needed space to think. Too much space, as it turned out. My plan was to explore the Ruby Mountains, a range locals call the Alps of Nevada. I'd start at Lamoille Canyon, make my way to Liberty Lake, then traverse the ridgeline toward Harrison Pass. The route would take me through dense pine forests, across alpine meadows, and past glacial lakes nestled between towering peaks. According to my research, I'd encounter challenging terrain but nothing beyond my abilities. On the first day, I drove my Subaru to the Thomas Canyon campground to acclimate to the elevation before starting the real journey. The campground was nearly empty, just a couple of RVs at the far end and a Forest Service truck parked near the entrance. I set up my tent, organized my gear, and took a short evening hike to stretch my legs. That's when I met Ranger Davis. He was a tall, weathered man with deep creases around pale blue eyes, the kind of eyes that had seen too much sun and too little sleep. I waved as he approached on the trail. "Evening," he said, tipping his hat. "Solo hiker?" I nodded. "Heading into the backcountry tomorrow, planning to spend about 2 weeks exploring the range." Something flickered across his face. Concern, maybe, or something deeper. He glanced toward the mountains rising behind us, jagged peaks already shadowed as the sun descended. "You might want to reconsider," he said quietly. "We've had some strange reports lately." "Reports?" "Missing hikers. 3 in the past month." He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. 2 were found, eventually. The 3rd is still missing. "What happened to the ones they found?" I asked, feeling a prickle of unease despite myself. Ranger Davis looked away. "Official report says exposure and dehydration, but between you and me," he lowered his voice, "something wasn't right about them. The medical examiner said they died from natural causes, but they looked hollowed out somehow, like something had been living inside them." I forced a laugh. "Sounds like local folklore to me." "Maybe." His expression remained grave. "But there's more. The 2 they found, they were experienced hikers, well-equipped, and they were found miles from their planned routes in areas that don't make any logical sense. One was discovered in Dead Man's Canyon. There's no trail there, no reason anyone would go that way." "People get disoriented in the wilderness all the time," I said, though the chill that ran down my spine had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. "Listen," he said, "I'm not trying to scare you off. Just be careful. Stick to your route. Let someone know exactly where you're planning to go and when you'll be back. And if you see anything unusual, anything at all, don't investigate. Just turn around and head back to civilization." I assured him I'd be careful, but inwardly I dismissed his warnings. Local rangers always had stories to scare tourists into being cautious. I'd been handling myself in the backcountry since I was a teenager. That night, I slept fitfully in my tent, dreaming of Elena. In the dream, she was calling my name from somewhere deep in the forest, her voice echoing strangely as if coming from inside a cave. When I finally found her, she was facing away from me, her hair moving oddly in the still air. When she turned, Her face was hollow, literally, with just a dark cavity where her features should have been. I woke, gasping, covered in sweat despite the cool night air. The dream lingered as I packed up my camp the next morning, but the bright sunshine and the excitement of hitting the trail soon pushed it aside. The first 3 days of hiking were glorious. The weather was perfect. Clear, blue skies, temperatures in the high 60s, with refreshing breezes coming down from the snow-capped peaks. I followed Lamall Creek up through the canyon, past sheer cliff walls and cascading waterfalls, stopping frequently to photograph wildflowers and dramatic vistas. The physical exertion felt good, burning away the mental fog I'd been carrying since Elena left. On the evening of the 3rd day, I made camp near Liberty Lake, pitching my tent on a small plateau overlooking the water. As I sat cooking dinner on my portable stove, I watched the sunset paint the surrounding peaks gold, then crimson, then a deep violet that eventually faded to black. Stars emerged in the darkening sky, more stars than you could ever see from the city. That's when I first heard it. A sound like someone crying, so faint I initially thought it was just the wind through the pines or water trickling over rocks. But as night deepened, so did my certainty. Someone or something was sobbing in the darkness beyond my camp. "Hello?" I called, switching on my headlamp and peering into the trees. "Is someone there? Do you need help?" The crying stopped immediately. I listened for several minutes, hearing nothing but the gentle lapping of water against the lakeshore and the occasional rustle of nocturnal animals in the underbrush. Convincing myself it had been my imagination, or maybe a mountain lion since their cries can sound disturbingly human, I finished my meal and crawled into my sleeping bag. The next morning dawned misty and cool. As I packed up camp, I noticed something odd about my surroundings. The landscape looked subtly different than it had the night before. The lake seemed smaller, the surrounding trees taller and more densely packed. Even the mountain that had dominated the western view seemed to have shifted slightly. Its profile changed. I checked my map and GPS, confirming I was exactly where I thought I was. Everything matched up technically, yet something felt profoundly wrong. I attributed it to the morning mist playing tricks on my perception and set off toward my next destination, a high ridge that would offer panoramic views of the entire range. The trail started clear enough, but soon became faint, overgrown in places as if rarely used. This was strange. My research had indicated this was a popular route. By midday, I was fighting through dense brush, checking my GPS constantly to ensure I was still headed in the right direction. The mist had never fully lifted, shrouding the landscape in a gray veil that muffled sounds and made distances deceptive. Around 2 p.m., I emerged from a particularly thick stand of pines to find myself at the edge of a small clearing. In the center stood a cabin I hadn't seen marked on any map, a crude structure of weathered logs with a sagging roof and a single grimy window. Smoke rose from a crooked stone chimney. I hesitated. The cabin looked ancient and decrepit, yet someone was clearly inside. Perhaps a Forest Service outpost? Or a hunter's illegal squat? Either way, I needed to check my bearings, and whoever was inside might have better information about the trails than my increasingly questionable map. As I approached, the door creaked open. A man stepped out, stooped, elderly, with a long white beard and clothes that seemed to belong to another century. He regarded me with milky eyes. "Been expecting you," he said, his voice like gravel. "Folks usually come this way when they're lost." "I'm not lost," I said automatically, though I wasn't so sure anymore. "Just checking my route. This cabin isn't on my map." The old man made a sound that might have been a laugh. "No, I expect it wouldn't be. Maps don't show everything that's here, especially not in these mountains." "Do you live here?" I asked, glancing at the dilapidated structure. "For a time," he answered cryptically. "Come in. Rest your feet. Night comes early in these parts, and you don't want to be out there when it does." Every instinct told me to decline and continue on my way, but the mist was thickening into fog, and my GPS had begun to glitch. the screen flickering between my current coordinates and somewhere miles away. Reluctantly, I followed the old man inside. The cabin's interior was a single room, dimly lit by the fire in the hearth and a few candles placed on rough wooden furniture. Bundles of dried plants hung from the ceiling, filling the air with astringent scents. A small table held an assortment of stones, bones, and what looked like crude figurines carved from dark wood. "Sit," the old man said, gesturing to a chair by the fire. "Name's Ezekiel. Been in these mountains longer than most folks can remember." "James," I replied, lowering my pack to the floor but keeping it close. "Just passing through on a backpacking trip." Ezekiel's roomy eyes studied me with unsettling intensity. "No one just passes through here, James. People come to these mountains because they're looking for something, or running from something." He tilted his head. "Which are you?" The question hit uncomfortably close to home. "Neither," I lied. "Just enjoying nature." He didn't sound convinced. "Well, whatever you tell yourself. But know this, these mountains have a way of stripping away pretenses, of finding the hollow places inside a person and filling them." I shifted uneasily in my chair. "What do you mean by that?" Instead of answering, Ezekiel moved to a shelf and took down a jar filled with dark liquid. He poured some into a crude cup and handed it to me. "Drink. It'll help when night comes." "I'm good, thanks," I said, setting the cup aside. "Actually, I should probably get going. Need to make some more miles before setting up camp." "Not wise," Ezekiel said, his voice suddenly sharp. "The Hollow One walks after sunset. If you leave now, you'll meet it for sure." The Hollow One. Ancient spirit. Older than the mountains themselves. It hungers for what it doesn't have. Life. Feeling. Soul. It finds the empty places in people. The wounds, the losses, the grief, and it gets inside through those holes. Hollows you out from within until there's nothing left but skin. I thought of Ranger Davis's description of the dead hikers, hollowed out somehow. A coincidence, surely, but the back of my neck prickled all the same. "Sounds like a local legend," I said, trying to sound casual. "All legends start somewhere." Ezekiel stared into the fire. The Paiute called it Pu-Gip Tikuta, the spirit that eats. Early settlers knew it too. Whole mining camps would go missing. They'd find the bodies later, intact but empty, like dried husks. He looked up at me. "What loss are you carrying, James? What hollow place might it find in you?" Elena's face flashed in my mind, not as she had been in life, but as in my dream, with that terrible emptiness where her features should be. I stood abruptly. "I need to go," I said, hoisting my pack. "Thanks for the hospitality." Ezekiel made no move to stop me, but as I reached the door, he spoke again. "If you meet it, don't look in its eyes. That's how it finds your emptiness. And if you hear voices calling, familiar voices, don't answer. That's not your loved one. It's the Hollow One wearing their sound like a skin." I mumbled something non-committal and stepped back outside. The fog had thickened considerably during my brief stay in the cabin, reducing visibility to mere yards. Checking my GPS, I found it completely dead, the screen black and unresponsive. My compass was working at least, so I oriented myself and set off in what I hoped was the right direction, eager to put distance between myself and the disturbing old man. I hiked for about an hour, moving as quickly as the limited visibility allowed, before accepting that I needed to make camp for the night. The fog had become so dense that I risked walking off a cliff if I continued. Finding a relatively flat area sheltered by a rocky outcropping, I set up my tent and prepared a cold dinner, not wanting to attract attention with a stove flame. As I ate, the silence of the forest pressed in around me, a profound, unnatural silence. No wind in the trees, no distant calls of birds or animals. Nothing but the sounds of my own breathing and heartbeat. Then I heard it again, crying, closer this time, and unmistakably human. A woman's sobs, breaking the silence like stones dropped into still water. "Hello?" I called, instantly regretting it as I remembered Ezekiel's warning about answering voices. The crying stopped. Then, after a moment, James, is that you?" My blood turned to ice. It was Elena's voice, exactly her voice, with that slight catch she always had when she'd been crying. "Elena?" The name left my lips before I could stop it. "James, thank God. I've been lost for hours. I can't see anything in this fog. Please, keep talking so I can find you." My mind raced. It couldn't be Elena. She was in Seattle, hundreds of miles away, living with the accounting executive she'd left me for. This had to be some kind of trick, or I was hallucinating, my loneliness manifesting in the worst possible way. "You're not real," I said firmly, mostly to convince myself. "You're not Elena." A pause. Then her voice again. Closer. "Baby, what are you talking about? Of course it's me. I've been so worried about you. Please, let me see you." Every fiber of my being wanted to believe it was her, that by some miracle she had tracked me to this remote wilderness to reconcile. But Ezekiel's words echoed in my mind. "That's not your loved one. It's the hollow one wearing their sound like a skin." "Go away," I said, my voice shaking. "Whatever you are, leave me alone." "James, you're scaring me." Her voice trembled with what sounded like genuine fear. "There's something out here in the fog. I can hear it moving. Please, let me come to where you are. I need you." Those last 3 words, "I need you," nearly broke my resolve. How many times had I longed to hear Elena say that during our marriage's final days? I found myself standing, moving toward the sound of her voice. I stopped at the edge of my small camp, peering into the dense fog. A shape was emerging, a human silhouette, feminine and familiar. "James," Elena's voice called, so close now. "I can almost see you. Come a little closer." One more step and I would be able to see her face. One more step and I could confirm it wasn't really her, that this was all some elaborate hallucination brought on by isolation and the old man's stories. I took that step. The figure that materialized from the fog had Elena's height, her build, her long, dark hair, but where her face should have been was nothing. Not darkness, not a blur, but a kind of visual void that my eyes couldn't properly process, a hole in reality itself. I stumbled backward with a cry of horror. The thing that wasn't Elena moved forward, matching my retreat step for step. Now that I could see it clearly, or as clearly as my mind would allow, I noticed other wrongnesses. Its movements too fluid, as if its limbs had extra joints, its fingers too long and pale. The way its hair moved independently of its body, like underwater plants in a current. "James," it said in Elena's perfect voice, coming from that impossible void where its face should be, "don't you still love me? Don't you want to fill the emptiness inside you?" Terror propelled me backward until I hit the rock wall behind my tent. There was nowhere left to retreat. The creature advanced, its arms outstretched as if for an embrace. In desperation, I fumbled in my pocket for my flashlight and clicked it on, aiming the beam directly at the thing's face void. The light seemed to bend around the emptiness, creating bizarre prismatic effects, but the creature flinched back with a sound like tearing fabric. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. Grabbing only my backpack, I abandoned my tent and ran blindly into the fog, away from the thing wearing Elena's voice. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out, stumbling over rocks and roots, branches clawing at my face and arms. When I finally collapsed from exhaustion, I found myself in a small clearing I didn't recognize. The fog was thinner here, allowing me to see patches of night sky between the clouds. I sat with my back against a tree, flashlight clutched in my trembling hand, listening intently for any sound of pursuit. Hours passed. Occasionally, I would hear distant cries, sometimes Elena's voice, sometimes what sounded like children laughing, once even my own voice calling for help. But nothing approached my clearing, and eventually gray dawn light began filtering through the fog. With daylight came a semblance of rationality. I told myself that stress, isolation, and the old man's stories had triggered some kind of psychotic episode. The hollow one was just a hallucination, a manifestation of my guilt and grief over my failed marriage. Now, in the light of day, I needed to focus on practical matters, getting back to civilization. My GPS was still dead, and when I checked my phone, I found it had no signal, as expected, but also that the battery had drained completely overnight despite being nearly full the previous evening. My compass, at least, still worked, though the needle swung erratically when I tried to orient myself. I decided to head downhill, reasoning that I would eventually hit a stream or river that could lead me to a trail or road. The fog was patchy now, thick in some places but clear in others, allowing me glimpses of my surroundings. Nothing looked familiar. The terrain was rougher than I remembered from my hike-in, with sharp rock formations I didn't recall passing. By midday, I came across a small stream and decided to follow it, grateful for both the direction and the fresh water. The fog had mostly lifted, but an oppressive silence still hung over the forest. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. Even the stream seemed to flow with unnatural quietness. As the light began to fade, I rounded a bend in the stream and stopped short. Ahead of me, nestled in a small clearing, was a familiar sight: the old cabin. Somehow, after a full day of hiking in what I thought was a straight line downhill, I had circled back to Ezekiel's home. For a moment, I considered turning around and heading in the opposite direction, but exhaustion and hunger overrode my misgivings. Besides, whatever I had experienced the night before, Ezekiel had tried to warn me. Perhaps he could help me find my way out of these increasingly nightmarish mountains. I approached the cabin cautiously. It looked the same as before: weathered logs, sagging roof, smoke from the chimney. But no one emerged when I called out. "Ezekiel?" I tried again, moving closer to the door. "It's James, from yesterday. I need your help." No answer. Steeling myself, I pushed the door open and peered inside. The cabin's interior was as I remembered: the hearth, the rough furniture, the hanging herbs. But Ezekiel wasn't there. Instead, sitting in the chair by the fire was a figure I recognized instantly from its silhouette: Elena. Her back was to me, her long, dark hair cascading over the chair. "No," I whispered, backing away. "You're not real." "James?" The figure turned slowly, revealing an ordinary human face. Elena's face exactly as I remembered it, beautiful and concerned. "What are you talking about? Of course I'm real." She stood and moved toward me, perfectly normal in every way. No void where her face should be, no extra-jointed movements. Just my wife, somehow here in this cabin in the wilderness. "How?" I began, unable to form coherent thoughts. "How did you find me?" "Find you?" She looked confused. "Honey, you're not making sense. We came here together, remember? For our anniversary?" I shook my head violently. "No, we're divorced. You left me for that guy from your office." Elena's expression softened with concern. "James, we're not divorced. We've been married for 7 years. There's no guy from the office. I think you must have had a bad dream." Could it be true? Had everything, the divorce, the crushing loneliness, this solo backpacking trip, been some kind of complex delusion? I wanted so badly to believe it. "Where's Ezekiel?" I asked, clinging to what I thought was reality. "The old man who lives here." Elena looked genuinely confused. "There's no old man, James. We rented this cabin for the week, just the two of us. Remember? Through that wilderness retreat company." My certainty wavered. Could I have imagined Ezekiel too? Created a whole fictional backstory to explain my presence in these mountains? "Come sit down," Elena said gently, taking my hand. Her touch felt real, warm. "You look exhausted. Let me make you some tea." I allowed her to lead me to the chair by the fire, my mind reeling. As I sat, I noticed the cup on the small table beside me. The same crude cup Ezekiel had offered me, still filled with dark liquid. "What's this?" I asked, picking it up. "Your tea from earlier," Elena said, stoking the fire with her back to me. "You said it was too hot, so you were letting it cool." I stared into the dark liquid, fragments of memory stirring. Ezekiel offering me the same cup, saying it would help when night comes. Me refusing it. "Drink up," Elena said, turning to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It'll make you feel better." I started to raise the cup to my lips, then stopped. Something was wrong. Looking more closely at Elena, I noticed subtle inconsistencies. Her hair was parted on the wrong side. A small scar on her chin that she'd had since childhood was missing. Her eyes were a shade darker than I remembered. "You're not Elena," I said quietly, setting the cup down. Her smile faltered, then stretched unnaturally wide. "Don't be silly, James. Of course I am." "No." I stood up, backing toward the door. "Elena has a tiny scar on her chin from falling off her bike when she was 8. She parts her hair on the right, not the left. And her eyes are hazel, not brown." The thing wearing Elena's appearance went very still. When it spoke again, its voice had changed, becoming layered, as if multiple people were speaking in imperfect unison. "Such small details to cling to," it said. "But your emptiness is so much larger, the void she left inside you. I can fill it, James. I can be her for you, better than her. I can be whatever you need." "You're the hollow one," I whispered, my hand finding the doorknob behind me. It nodded, the movement too smooth, too liquid. "The hollow one, the empty hunter, the soul thief. I've worn many names, just as I've worn many faces." It gestured to the cup. "Drink, and the pain will stop. You won't feel the hollowing. It will be like falling asleep." "Where's Ezekiel?" I demanded, trying to keep it talking while I slowly turned the doorknob. "Ezekiel served his purpose," it said with Elena's mouth. "He brought you to me, just as he brought the others." "He warned me about you," I countered. The thing laughed, the sound like dry leaves scraping stone. "Of course he did. Fear makes the hollowing so much sweeter. The old man has been dead for decades, James. I wear him sometimes when I need to lure wanderers who think they're lost." As it spoke, Elena's familiar features began to shift subtly. Cheekbones too sharp, jaw too angular, eyes growing larger and darker until they dominated her face. Then the transformation accelerated, her skin seeming to melt and reform, features flowing like wax heated beyond endurance. I yanked the door open and plunged outside, only to find myself not in the forest but in a vast cavern, its walls glistening wetly in the light of phosphorescent fungi. The ground beneath my feet was not dirt but something organic that yielded sickeningly with each step. "There is no escape," the thing said from behind me, its voice now barely recognizable as human. "This mountain, this forest, they're all part of me. Every tree, every rock, every shadow. Even your precious Elena. She's in here too." I turned to face it, whatever it now was. The Elena shape had dissolved completely, replaced by something my mind couldn't fully comprehend. A shifting mass of darkness punctuated by too many limbs, too many mouths, too many eyes that weren't eyes but holes punched through reality itself. "The others fought too," it said, countless mouths moving in horrible synchrony. "The strong ones always do, but in the end, they all surrendered to their emptiness." It surged forward, impossibly fast. I stumbled backward, falling onto the organic floor that pulsed beneath me like a giant heart. The creature loomed over me, its form continuing to shift and flow, occasionally resolving into horrific approximations of human features I recognized. Ezekiel's beard, a ranger's uniform, Elena's hair, before dissolving back into chaos. Something within me snapped. Not in surrender, but in rage. This thing, whatever it was, had taken Elena from me once in my memories, and now it was trying to use her against me again. I would not let it hollow me out. I would not become another empty husk for it to discard. With a roar of defiance, I launched myself at the creature, hands outstretched. My fingers sank into its substance, which felt simultaneously like cold mud and burning ice. It shrieked, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once and tried to flow away from my grasp. But I held on, driven by fury and desperation. Where my hands touched it, the creature's flowing darkness seemed to solidify, becoming more substantial, more vulnerable. I dug my fingers in deeper, tearing at whatever passed for its flesh. "You can't hollow me out," I snarled through gritted teeth. "I've already survived that pain once. I rebuilt myself. There's nothing empty in me for you to fill." The creature thrashed and howled, its form contracting and expanding violently. I felt something tear loose in my hands, a chunk of its substance that writhed like a living thing before going still. The main mass of the creature recoiled, shrinking away from me. "Thief!" it thundered, its voice shaking the cavern walls. "Thief of essence, giver of hollowness." I stood, the excised piece of the creature clutched in my fist like a trophy. "Leave me," I commanded, my voice steadier than I felt. "Find some other emptiness to fill." For a moment, the hollow one seemed to hesitate, its chaotic form stabilizing into something vaguely humanoid but still profoundly wrong. A silhouette with too many angles, a head that tilted at an impossible angle. "Your hollowness remains," it said, quieter now. "I taste it. The wound is scarred but not healed. One day you will call to me again, James Anderson, when the loneliness grows too great, when the void inside you expands beyond bearing, and I will answer." Then it was gone. Not with a dramatic vanishing, but with a subtle fading, like fog dissipating in sunlight. One moment it filled the cavern with its presence. The next, I was alone. Except I wasn't in a cavern anymore. I was standing in a forest clearing, morning sunlight filtering through pine branches overhead. My tent was beside me, packed neatly as if I'd never fled in terror. My GPS lay on a nearby rock, a screen glowing with my exact coordinates that placed me right where I should be, on my planned route near Liberty Lake. In my hand, I held not a piece of some otherworldly creature but a small, intricately carved wooden figure. A human form with no face, just a smooth blank where features should be. I didn't recognize it, had never seen it before, yet somehow knew it had been Ezekiel's. Had any of it been real? The cabin, the old man, the hollow one? Or had I experienced some kind of breakdown, triggered by exhaustion and emotional baggage I'd brought into the wilderness? I don't know. I finished my hike, cutting it short by several days, and made my way back to civilization without further incident. The rangers I spoke to at the trailhead knew nothing of any Ranger Davis, nor of missing hikers in the area. When I described the cabin, they exchanged puzzled glances and told me no structures existed in that region of the backcountry. But the wooden figurine is still in my possession. I've thought about throwing it away many times but can never bring myself to do it. Sometimes, late at night, I think I hear it whispering, promises of fullness, of an end to loneliness, if only I would open myself to the hollowing. I called Elena when I got home, not to reconcile, the bridge is well and truly burned, but to make sure she was okay. She answered, sounding surprised to hear from me but cordial enough. We chatted briefly. She's happy with her new life. The hole she left is still there inside me, but I'm learning to live with it, to fill it with other things. Friends, hobbies, small daily pleasures. Some nights, though, I dream of the mountains. Of fog rolling in, thicker and darker than any natural mist. Of a figure emerging from that fog, wearing Elena's shape but empty where it matters most. In those dreams, I'm always running, always searching for something solid and real to cling to. And sometimes in the darkest hours before dawn, I catch myself listening for a familiar voice calling my name from the shadows. So far, I've been strong enough not to answer. But the Hollow One was right about one thing. The emptiness remains, and I wonder how long I can resist its call before the hollowing begins again. My name is Benjamin Collins, and I am 32 years old. This happened in Mount Charleston, Nevada, just last summer. The first signs of trouble were so subtle that I dismissed them. That was my first mistake. "Come on, Ben, this weekend is going to be epic," Nate had said, his enthusiasm practically vibrating through my phone. "Mark and I found this incredible off-trail spot near Mount Charleston, completely secluded. The views are insane." I'd been hesitant at first. My hiking experience was limited to well-marked trails and campgrounds with amenities. But after a brutal quarter at work, 14-hour days designing software for people who kept changing their requirements, I was desperate for escape. "Fine," I'd finally agreed, "but if I die out there, I'm haunting both of you for eternity." Nate had laughed. "Deal." If only he'd known how prophetic those words would be. The drive from Las Vegas took about 40 minutes, the urban sprawl giving way to Joshua trees and rugged desert landscape. As we climbed in elevation toward the spring mountains, the temperature dropped and the vegetation transformed. The three of us, myself, Nate Wilson, and Mark Clark, were crammed into Mark's Jeep Wrangler along with enough gear to survive the weekend. "So, remind me again why we couldn't just stay at the Kyle Canyon campground like normal people?" I asked as we turned onto a dirt road that wasn't on any map I could see on my phone. "Because normal is boring," Mark replied, his eyes fixed on the increasingly rough terrain. Mark was the most experienced outdoorsman among us, an environmental scientist who spent more time in wilderness than civilization. His dark beard and weathered skin made him look older than his 34 years. "Trust me, this place is worth it." Nate nodded from the passenger seat. "We found it last month. It's like this hidden valley that tourists don't know about." "How far off trail are we talking?" I asked, anxiety creeping into my voice. "About a 2-hour hike from where we park," Mark said casually. "Moderate difficulty." I stared out the window at the dense pine forest we were now entering. The trees seemed to close in around us, branches reaching like gnarled fingers toward the Jeep. Mount Charleston loomed in the distance, its 11,916-foot peak partially shrouded in clouds. Something about its silhouette against the sky made me uneasy, like it was watching us. That was ridiculous, of course. Mountains don't watch people. We parked at a small clearing that barely qualified as a pullout. Mark checked his GPS and nodded. "Trail starts about 50 yards that way," he said, pointing to what looked like nothing more than a game trail disappearing into the pines. We shouldered our packs, mine significantly lighter than theirs since I'd borrowed most of my gear, and set off. The forest was unusually quiet. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Just the crunch of pine needles beneath our boots and our labored breathing as we climbed. "You guys notice how quiet it is?" I asked after about 45 minutes. Mark paused, tilting his head. "Huh. Yeah. Weird." "Probably just the time of day," Nate suggested. "Animals are smarter than us. They're probably napping somewhere cool." I nodded, but the silence continued to bother me as we hiked deeper into the wilderness. The trail became increasingly difficult to follow, winding through boulder fields and steep ravines. Several times I was sure we'd lost it completely, but Mark always seemed to know exactly where to go, consulting his GPS only occasionally. "How much further?" I asked, 2 hours in. My shoulders were aching from the unaccustomed weight of the pack, and my hiking boots, purchased hastily the day before, were rubbing blisters on my heels. "Should be just over this ridge," Mark said, pointing to a steep incline ahead. I gritted my teeth and followed them up. When we reached the top, even I had to admit the view was worth the effort. Below us lay a small valley, lush with aspen trees surrounding a clear mountain stream. Meadow flowers dotted the grassland in splashes of purple and yellow. "Told you," Nate said, grinning at my expression. Epic, right? Not bad, I conceded, already feeling better about the trip. We made our way down to the valley floor and found a flat area near the stream to set up camp. As Mark and Nate expertly assembled their tents, I fumbled with mine, eventually producing something that looked vaguely habitable. That's interesting architecture, Nate commented, eyeing my lopsided tent. It's avant-garde, I replied dryly. You wouldn't understand. We spent the afternoon exploring the valley. Mark pointed out various plants and their uses, while Nate set up his camera for time-lapse shots of the clouds moving over the mountain. I found a spot by the stream and sat listening to the water, feeling the tension of the past months slowly draining away. As the sun began to set, we gathered firewood and Mark built a small campfire. The temperature was dropping rapidly, a common occurrence in the high desert, and I was grateful for the warmth as we sat around the flames eating our dehydrated meals. You know, there are stories about these mountains, Mark said casually as darkness fell. What kind of stories? I asked, pulling my jacket tighter around me. The local Paiute tribe believes this area is sacred, he explained. They say the mountains are home to spirits that don't take kindly to trespassers. Nate rolled his eyes. Here we go, with the campfire stories. I'm serious, Mark insisted. When I was doing research in the area last year, one of the tribal elders told me about a place they call the Valley of Whispers. Supposedly, if you listen carefully at night, you can hear the voices of those who died here. Cheerful, I muttered. There's this one legend about a creature they call the Nun Ape, kind of like a skinwalker, Mark continued, his face eerily illuminated by the firelight. It's said to take the form of lost hikers to lure others deeper into the mountains. And then what? I asked, against my better judgment. Mark leaned forward. And then it steals their skin. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Thanks for that, Nate said sarcastically. Really helps set the mood. Mark laughed. Just sharing the local color. Don't worry, I've been coming to these mountains for years and haven't lost my skin yet. We stayed up a while longer, talking about less disturbing topics, before finally turning in for the night. Inside my tent, I wriggled into my sleeping bag and tried to get comfortable on the thin camping pad. Outside, the wind had picked up, making the sides of the tent flutter and creating whispering sounds as it moved through the aspens. Whispering sounds. I tried to push Mark's story out of my mind, but in the darkness it was difficult not to hear voices in the wind. Human-like voices, rising and falling in patterns that almost formed words. I put in my earbuds and played music to drown them out, eventually drifting into an uneasy sleep. I woke to absolute silence. My music had stopped, my phone dead, despite having been nearly fully charged when I'd gone to sleep. The silence was so complete that for a moment I wondered if I'd gone deaf. No wind, no stream sounds, no nocturnal creatures. Then I heard it, a soft scratching on the outside of my tent, like fingernails dragging slowly across the fabric. Scritch, scritch, scritch. My breath caught in my throat. Probably just a branch, I told myself, or some small animal. The scratching moved around to the side of the tent, then stopped directly above where I lay. Tap, tap, tap. 3 distinct taps. 3, as if someone, something, was testing the material. I lay frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. Ben? A voice whispered, Nate's voice. You awake? Relief flooded through me. Just Nate checking on me. Yeah, I whispered back. What's up? Did you hear something out there? He asked, his voice sounding strange, slightly off in a way I couldn't quite identify. Just the wind, I lied, not wanting to seem paranoid. A pause. There is no wind tonight. He was right, I realized. The absolute stillness was what had woken me. Can I come in? Nate asked. I need to show you something. Something about his tone made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. What time is it? I stalled, fumbling for my dead phone. Time doesn't matter here, came the reply, and now I was certain. This didn't sound like Nate. The cadence was wrong, the pitch slightly too low. "I'm trying to sleep," I said. "We can talk in the morning." Another pause, longer this time. The silence stretched until I began to wonder if I'd imagined the entire exchange. Then, "It will be too late in the morning, Benjamin." My full name. Nate never called me Benjamin. The zipper of my tent began to move slowly upward, though I hadn't heard anyone touch it. I lunged forward and grabbed it, holding it shut with trembling hands. "Go away," I hissed. A soft laugh came from outside, a sound that started like Nate's laugh but morphed into something inhuman, a chittering noise that reminded me of insects. "As you wish," the voice said, "but remember, I tried to warn you." Footsteps retreated from my tent. Strange, shuffling footsteps that didn't sound like they were made by hiking boots, or human feet at all. I sat awake for what felt like hours, listening intently, but heard nothing more. Eventually, exhaustion overcame fear, and I fell into a restless sleep filled with dreams of being chased through endless forests by something that wore my friends' faces. Morning arrived with golden sunlight filtering through the trees and birds singing cheerfully, as if the night's strangeness had never happened. I emerged from my tent to find Mark already up, boiling water on his camp stove. "Morning, sunshine," he greeted me. "Coffee?" I nodded gratefully, looking around the campsite. "Where's Nate?" "Still sleeping, I guess," Mark replied, nodding toward Nate's tent. "You look like hell. Rough night?" I hesitated, unsure whether to mention the strange encounter. "Had some weird dreams," I said finally. "Is my phone charger in your pack? Mine died overnight." Mark frowned. "That's weird. Mine too, and my GPS." He pulled out both devices to show me. "Batteries were full yesterday." A sense of unease settled in my stomach. "Could be the cold," I suggested, not believing it myself. "Maybe," Mark said, looking unconvinced. "Go wake Nate while I finish breakfast. We should get an early start if we want to reach Eagle's Peak today." I walked over to Nate's tent and called his name. No response. I called louder, then finally unzipped his tent, only to find it empty. His sleeping bag was there, neatly arranged as if it hadn't been slept in. His pack was there too, but there was no sign of Nate himself. "Mark," I called, trying to keep the alarm out of my voice. "Nate's not here." Mark joined me at the tent, his expression changing from confusion to concern as he saw the untouched sleeping bag. "That doesn't make sense. Where would he go without his gear?" We called Nate's name, our voices echoing through the valley. No answer. "Maybe he went to take photos at sunrise," Mark suggested, but I could tell he was worried. "Let's check his camera." Nate's expensive DSLR was still in its case in his tent. Now Mark looked seriously concerned. "This isn't like him," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "Let's split up and check the immediate area. He can't have gone far." I wanted to protest the splitting up part. Every horror movie I'd ever seen suggested this was a terrible idea, but Mark was already heading toward the stream. With a sigh, I turned in the opposite direction, toward a stand of aspens at the edge of our campsite. "Nate!" I called as I walked. "Nate, this isn't funny." The morning sun was bright, but as I entered the aspen grove, the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. The white trunks created a maze-like effect, and within moments, I realized I couldn't see our campsite anymore. "Great," I muttered to myself. Now I was the one who was lost. I was about to turn back when I spotted something on the ground ahead, a dark shape against the fallen leaves. Moving closer, I realized it was a camera. Nate's backup camera, a small point-and-shoot he sometimes carried in his pocket. My heart pounding, I picked it up. The screen was cracked, but the device still worked. I pressed the review button, and the last photo appeared, taken at 3:17 a.m. according to the timestamp. It showed our campsite from a distance, all 3 tents illuminated by what must have been Nate's flashlight. But there was something else in the photo, something that made my blood run cold. Standing between the tents was a figure. Too tall to be human, its limbs unnaturally long and jointed in the wrong places. It seemed to be looking directly at the camera, though its face, if you could call it that, was nothing but a dark smudge. I dropped the camera as if it had burned me. This had to be a joke, an elaborate prank that Nate and Mark had planned. "Very funny, guys," I shouted, anger replacing fear. "You can come out now." Only silence answered me. I picked up the camera again, steeling myself to look at the photo more carefully. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, a smudge on the lens. The photo was gone. The screen now showed no images, where the disturbing picture had been seconds before. "What the hell?" I whispered, scrolling frantically through the empty memory card. "Did you find something?" Mark's voice came from behind me, making me jump. I spun around. "Jesus, you scared me." "Yeah, I found Nate's backup camera." I handed it to him, explaining what I'd seen. Mark examined the camera, his brow furrowed. "There's nothing on here now," he confirmed. "Maybe you imagined it." "I know what I saw," I insisted. "Did you find any sign of him?" Mark shook his head. "Nothing. This doesn't make sense." We returned to camp, both lost in thought. As we emerged from the trees, I stopped short. "Mark," I said slowly, "weren't there 3 tents when we left?" We both stared at the campsite, where only 2 tents now stood, mine and Mark's. Nate's tent, pack, sleeping bag, all were gone. It was as if he had never been there at all. Mark's face had gone pale. "This is impossible. We both saw his tent not 20 minutes ago." I felt a chill creep up my spine as I remembered the whispered conversation outside my tent during the night. "It will be too late in the morning, Benjamin." "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "Right now." Mark nodded, his usual confidence visibly shaken. "Yeah, let's pack up and go find a ranger station. Something's not right." We packed in record time, barely speaking. The cheerful morning had turned ominous, the silence of the forest now seeming threatening rather than peaceful. As I rolled up my sleeping bag, I noticed something small and white caught in the zipper of my tent, a small piece of paper. I pulled it free and unfolded it. Written in what looked like charcoal were 3 words: "Don't trust him." The handwriting was Nate's. I quickly stuffed the note in my pocket, glancing over at Mark, who was securing his tent to his pack. Could Mark have done something to Nate? The thought seemed absurd. They'd been friends for years, long before I met either of them. But then, what was happening defied rational explanation. "Ready?" Mark called, shouldering his pack. I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "Which way back to the jeep?" Mark pointed to the ridge we'd crossed the day before. "Same way we came in. Should take about 2 hours if we keep a good pace." We set off, the weight of my pack now seeming insignificant compared to the weight of my suspicion and fear. Mark led the way, occasionally checking his compass since his GPS was still dead. I kept a few paces behind him, watching his movements, searching for anything unusual. But Mark seemed like himself, concerned about Nate, tense about our situation, but otherwise normal. He even remembered to point out a patch of wild strawberries we passed, just as he would have done on any other hike. After about an hour, we stopped to rest and drink water. The sun was high now, beating down on us as we climbed. "Mark," I said carefully, "that story you told last night about the Nunhape, was that real?" He looked up from his water bottle, his expression grave. "The Paiute legends? Yeah, they're real stories. Whether what they describe is real." He shrugged. "I'm a scientist. I don't generally believe in monsters." "But you're worried about Nate," I pressed. "Of course I am," he replied sharply. "People go missing in these mountains every year. Usually, there are perfectly logical explanations. They get lost, fall, suffer from exposure, but occasionally—" He trailed off. "Occasionally what?" Mark sighed. "Occasionally, there are disappearances that don't make sense, people who vanish from well-marked trails, Experienced hikers who should know better than to wander off. Like us, I said quietly. He met my eyes. We're not on a well-marked trail, and I'm starting to think that was a mistake. We continued in silence after that, the climb becoming steeper and more difficult. I noticed that the landscape didn't look familiar, despite supposedly being the same route we'd taken in. "Are you sure this is the right way?" I asked as we squeezed through a narrow passage between two large boulders that I didn't remember from yesterday. "No," Mark admitted, surprising me with his honesty. "Everything looks different. My compass is acting strange too." He held it out for me to see. The needle was spinning slowly in circles, never settling on north. Fear clenched my stomach. "So, we're lost." "Temporarily disoriented," he corrected, ever the optimist. "The Jeep is north-northeast of where we camped. If we keep heading in that general direction and climbing, we'll eventually hit the main trail." But 3 hours later, we were still walking, and there was no sign of any trail. The forest had become denser, the trees closer together, their branches seeming to reach for us as we passed. Several times I was certain I heard footsteps paralleling our path, just out of sight among the trees. "Mark," I said finally, "we need to admit that we're lost." He stopped, shoulders slumping slightly. "Yeah," he agreed. "This isn't right. We should have reached the trail long ago." "Could we retrace our steps back to the valley?" I suggested. At least we had water there. Mark nodded and was about to reply when a sound echoed through the trees, a distant call that might have been a human voice. We both froze. "Nate!" Mark called out. The sound came again, closer this time. It was definitely a voice, calling something that might have been help or might have been hello. "Over here!" I shouted, relief washing over me. Maybe Nate had just gotten turned around in the dark. Maybe there was a rational explanation for everything. Mark started toward the voice, but I caught his arm. "Wait," I whispered, remembering the note. "What if it's not him?" "What do you mean?" he asked, confused. I pulled out the crumpled paper and showed it to him. "I found this in my tent." Mark read it, his face darkening. "When were you going to tell me about this?" "I wasn't sure," I began. "You weren't sure if you could trust me," he finished, hurt evident in his voice. "Jesus, Ben. Can you blame me, after everything that's happened?" Before he could answer, the voice called again, unmistakably Nate's voice now, and much closer. "Guys, is that you? I can see you." We both turned toward the sound. Through the trees about 50 yards away, I could make out a figure wearing Nate's red jacket, waving at us. "Nate!" Mark called, relief flooding his features. He started forward. I hesitated, something nagging at the back of my mind. The note. The strange visitor in the night. The thing in the photograph. "Mark, wait," I called after him. "Something's not right." But Mark was already jogging toward our friend, calling out to him. I followed reluctantly, trying to pinpoint what was bothering me. As we got closer, I realized what it was. Nate was standing perfectly still except for his waving arm, and his face. His face didn't look quite right. The proportions were slightly off, as if someone had constructed a Nate mask but didn't get the details quite right. "Mark, stop!" I shouted, but too late. Mark had reached Nate and thrown his arms around him in a relieved hug. For a moment, they stood like that, frozen in an embrace about 20 yards ahead of me. Then Mark screamed, a sound of pure agony that cut off abruptly. I watched in horror as his body seemed to collapse inward, his skin rippling as if something was moving beneath it. The thing that looked like Nate had its face pressed against Mark's neck, and I swear I could hear a sucking, slurping sound. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. Behind me, I heard a wet, tearing sound followed by something that might have been laughter but sounded nothing like human. I ran until my lungs burned, then kept running. I had no direction, no plan beyond get away. Eventually, I collapsed behind a fallen log, gasping for breath, straining to hear if I was being pursued. Silence. Just the hammering of my heart and my ragged breathing. I stayed there for what felt like hours, afraid to move, afraid to make a sound. The light began to fade from the sky, and I realized with growing dread that I would soon be alone in these mountains in the dark. Alone, except for whatever that thing was. As twilight deepened, I finally forced myself to take stock of my situation. I still had my pack with a sleeping bag, some food and water, and basic first aid supplies. I had a small pocket knife and a flashlight. No phone signal, of course, no GPS. No idea where I was or which direction would lead me to safety. I needed a plan. Panic would only get me killed. I remembered a basic rule of being lost in the wilderness. If you find water, follow it downstream. Water leads to civilization. Taking out my flashlight, I headed downhill, moving as quietly as possible, hoping to find a stream. The forest was changing as night fell, becoming something alien and menacing. Shadows seemed to move of their own accord, and more than once I was certain I saw eyes watching me from the darkness. After about an hour of careful progress, I heard the blessed sound of running water. Following the noise, I came upon a small creek cutting through the forest floor. Relief flooded me, followed immediately by caution. I would follow it, but not tonight. Moving through unknown terrain in the dark was asking for injury. I found a spot beneath a rocky overhang where I could keep my back protected and settled in for the night. Sleep was out of the question, but I needed to rest. I arranged some branches in front of me that would make noise if anything approached and settled in to wait for dawn, my knife clutched in one hand, flashlight in the other. As the hours crawled by, I became aware of sounds in the forest. Not the normal nocturnal sounds of wildlife, but whispers. Just as Mark had described in his story, voices too faint to make out words but distinctly human in quality. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then a voice I recognized cut through the whispers. Benjamin. Nate's voice, or the thing that had taken his form. I know you're out there, Benjamin. You can't hide from me. I held my breath, pressing myself against the rock face. I can help you, the voice continued, closer now. You're lost. Let me guide you out. The worst part was how reasonable it sounded, how tempting the offer was. Your friend Mark has been asking for you, it said, and I could hear the smile in its voice. He's worried. Bile rose in my throat as I thought of what I'd seen happen to Mark. Was he truly dead, or was he something worse now? I can be anyone you want me to be, Benjamin, the voice whispered, now seemingly right beside my ear, though I could see nothing in the darkness. Your friend, your lover, your savior. I swung my flashlight toward the voice, illuminating nothing but empty forest. But in the sweep of the beam, I briefly caught sight of something moving between the trees, something tall and thin with too many joints. Go away, I growled, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. You're not Nate. You're not human. A laugh answered me, that same insect-like chittering from outside my tent. No, it agreed. I am so much more, and soon you will be too. The branches I had arranged suddenly scattered as if swept aside by an invisible hand. I scrambled backward, knife outstretched, but hit a solid rock. There was nowhere left to retreat. In the beam of my flashlight, I finally saw it clearly. The thing that had been stalking us. It stood over 7 feet tall, its body unnaturally thin and jointed like an insect's. Its skin was a mottled gray-white that seemed to shift and ripple, never quite solid. But its face was the most horrifying part. It kept changing, cycling through different human features as if trying them on. I saw Nate's eyes, Mark's nose, a mouth I didn't recognize, all poorly assembled on a head that was too large and shaped all wrong. "What are you?" I whispered, unable to look away from the grotesque display. I am the Nun Ape, it replied, its voice now a chorus of stolen sounds. I am the skin taker, the shapeshifter, the hunger in the mountain. It took a step toward me, its movements jerky and wrong. I lashed out with my knife, catching it across what might have been its wrist. It hissed, recoiling, and I saw that where I had cut it, the skin peeled back to reveal nothing underneath, just empty darkness. "You can't kill me," it said, sounding amused. "I've lived in these mountains since before your kind learned to make fire." "Maybe not," I agreed, desperation giving me courage. "But I bet you can feel pain." I lunged again with the knife, aiming for where its eyes should be. It dodged with inhuman speed, but not quite fast enough. The blade sliced across its cheek, and I heard a sound like tearing paper. Its features seemed to sag on one side, as if the cut had loosened its grip on whatever form it was trying to maintain. It shrieked, a sound so high-pitched and alien that I clapped my hands over my ears, dropping both knife and flashlight. In that moment of vulnerability, I felt cold fingers close around my throat, lifting me off my feet. The creature's face was inches from mine now, its features a chaotic swirl of stolen parts. "I will wear your skin," it hissed, its breath smelling of rot and decay. "I will speak with your voice. I will live your life until I tire of it." Black spots danced at the edges of my vision as its grip tightened. In desperation, I reached out blindly, my hand closing around a rock. With the last of my strength, I smashed it against the creature's temple. Its grip loosened enough for me to draw a ragged breath. I struck again, harder, and felt something give way beneath the rock. Not bone, but something softer, like wet clay. The creature dropped me, hands flying to its damaged head, which was now losing cohesion, features sliding and melting like wax under heat. I didn't wait to see more. I grabbed my fallen flashlight and ran, following the creek downhill as I'd planned. Behind me, the creature's shrieks turned to growls, then to a sound like hundreds of voices wailing at once. I ran until I couldn't hear it anymore, until the only sounds were my footsteps and the rushing water beside me. Dawn found me still following the creek, which had widened into a small river. I was exhausted, my throat bruised, my hands bloody from falls, but I was alive, and with the morning light came renewed determination to escape these mountains. The river led me to a wider valley I didn't recognize, but as the sun rose higher, I spotted something in the distance that made my heart leap. A road, a real, paved road winding through the mountains. It took me another 2 hours to reach it, constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every sound, but nothing pursued me. At least, nothing I could see. The road was Highway 158, as I learned from a sign. A scenic route through the Mount Charleston wilderness that eventually connected back to Highway 95 and Las Vegas. I started walking along it, thumb out whenever a vehicle approached. Eventually, an older couple in an RV stopped for me. They took one look at my battered appearance and insisted on driving me all the way back to Las Vegas, plying me with sandwiches and questions I couldn't possibly answer truthfully. I mumbled something about getting separated from my hiking group and left it at that. That was 3 months ago. I've since moved away from Nevada entirely, finding a new job in Seattle where the forests are nothing like the ones around Mount Charleston. I told the authorities about Mark and Nate going missing, of course, but I changed the details of our location and what happened. Who would believe the truth? They never found any trace of my friends. The official report lists them as missing hikers, presumably lost in the vast wilderness of the Spring Mountains. Just 2 more names on a list of people who went into those mountains and never came out. Sometimes at night, I still hear the whispers. They follow me in dreams. Voices that sound like Nate and Mark, but not quite right. Calling my name, asking me to come back to the mountains, telling me they miss me, telling me they're waiting. And sometimes when I look in the mirror, I swear my face doesn't look quite right, as if something is wearing my skin and hasn't gotten the details exactly correct. I know what you're thinking, that I imagined it all, that I suffered some kind of breakdown in the wilderness, or that I'm making this up. I wish that were true, But if you go hiking in the spring mountains near Mount Charleston, stick to the marked trails. And if you're camping and hear someone calling your name in the night, someone who sounds almost, but not quite, like someone you know, don't answer. Don't let them in. And whatever you do, don't trust a stranger who knows your full name, because I'm not the only one who made it out of those mountains. Something else did too, and it's wearing my friend's face. My name is Matthew Williams, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the outskirts of the Toyabe National Forest in Nevada, not far from Austin. I never thought I'd be writing this down, but I need someone to know what happened out there. Maybe then someone will believe me. My girlfriend Samantha Stewart and I had been planning this trip for months. Both of us worked at a tech startup in San Francisco, and after 2 years of barely leaving our apartments except to get groceries, we were desperate for some time away from screens and endless Zoom calls. Sam had this idea that we should reconnect with nature and find ourselves in the wilderness. I wasn't as enthusiastic about the prospect of no showers and sleeping on the ground, but I loved her enough to agree. Sam spent weeks researching the perfect location. She settled on a remote trail system in central Nevada, specifically around the Toyabe Range. According to her research, it was less frequented than other hiking destinations, offering pristine wilderness and solitude. Just what we needed, she said. "Matt, look at these views," she'd say, showing me pictures of jagged mountain peaks and dense pine forests. "And there's this place called Hickerson Petroglyph Recreation Area nearby with ancient Native American rock art. Wouldn't that be amazing to see?" I had to admit, the photos looked stunning. Miles of untouched wilderness, crystal-clear mountain streams, and views that stretched forever. What I didn't know then was that some places are untouched for a reason. We arrived in Austin, Nevada on a Friday afternoon in late September. It was a tiny town with barely 200 residents, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. We stopped at the only gas station to fill up and grab some last-minute supplies. The attendant, an older man with leathery skin and a permanent squint, looked us up and down as we approached the counter. "You folks passing through?" he asked, scanning our trail mix and extra batteries. "We're going hiking in the Toyabe Range," Sam said brightly, "planning to spend about 5 days out there." The man's hand paused over the register. "Whereabouts exactly?" Sam pulled out her map and pointed to our planned route, which included a trail that branched off into a lesser-known area called Blackbird Canyon. The man's face changed. It was subtle, but I caught it, a tightening around the eyes, a slight paleness beneath his weathered complexion. "You might want to stick to the main trails," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Those side canyons can be tricky, easy to get lost." Sam laughed. "Oh, we've got GPS and maps. We'll be fine." "GPS doesn't always work in the canyons," he replied, "and there's been mountain lion sightings this season." I felt a flicker of unease, but Sam was undeterred. "We've done our research. Thanks for the concern, though." As we were leaving, the man called after us. "If you do go up Blackbird Canyon, don't go past the lightning-struck pine. Nothing good beyond there." Sam rolled her eyes as we got into our rental car. "Small-town superstitions," she said. "They probably say that to all the tourists." I wasn't so sure. Maybe we should stick to the main trail system. "Matt, come on. Where's your sense of adventure? Those side trails are where all the untouched beauty is." I couldn't argue with her when she got like this. Sam had always been the more adventurous one, always pushing boundaries. It was what I loved about her, how she pulled me out of my comfort zone. But sometimes I wondered if she pushed too far. We drove the winding road up into the mountains, the landscape growing more rugged with each mile. By late afternoon, we'd reached the trailhead and shouldered our packs. The air was crisp and scented with pine, the sky an impossible blue. Despite my lingering unease, I felt a spark of excitement. Maybe this would be good for us after all. The first 2 days of hiking were everything Sam had promised. we followed the main trail up through alpine meadows dotted with late-season wildflowers, past bubbling streams where we filtered our drinking water, and through forests of aspen trees just beginning to turn golden. We saw deer, a fox, and even a golden eagle soaring overhead. At night, we'd make camp, cook simple meals on our portable stove, and fall asleep beneath more stars than I'd ever seen in my life. On the morning of the third day, we reached the junction where the side trail branched off toward Blackbird Canyon. "There it is," Sam said, pointing to the narrow path that disappeared into a dense stand of pines. It was barely visible, obviously much less traveled than the main route. I hesitated. "Are you sure about this? That guy at the gas station seemed pretty serious." Sam squeezed my hand. "It's just a few miles to explore the canyon. Then we can double back if you want. The trail guide mentioned there's a waterfall in there that almost nobody gets to see." I sighed, knowing I'd already lost the argument. "All right, but if it gets too rough, we turn around." The side trail was immediately more challenging. Overgrown in places, with fallen trees to climb over and rocky sections where the path nearly disappeared. But Sam was in her element, pushing forward with an energy that was almost feverish. By midday, the main trail was far behind us, and we were deep in Blackbird Canyon. The canyon walls rose high on either side, creating an enclosed feeling that was both beautiful and slightly oppressive. The forest here was different, darker, the trees closer together, the undergrowth thicker. Even the birdsong seemed more muted. "Look," Sam pointed ahead. "Is that it?" About 50 yards ahead stood a massive pine tree, split down the middle and blackened. The lightning-struck pine the gas station attendant had mentioned. A chill ran through me despite the warm afternoon sun. "Sam, maybe this is far enough." She was already moving toward it. "Don't tell me you believe that nonsense, it's just a tree that got hit by lightning." I followed reluctantly, my unease growing with each step. As we passed the blasted tree, I couldn't help but touch its blackened trunk. The char came off on my fingers like a warning. Beyond the tree, the canyon narrowed further, and the trail descended deeper into shadow. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees. We hiked another mile or so in relative silence, the only sounds our breathing and the crunch of our boots on the rocky path. Then the trail opened into a small clearing, and we both stopped in our tracks. In the center of the clearing stood an old cabin. Not the kind of maintained Forest Service cabin you sometimes find in national parks, but a true pioneer-era structure built from rough-hewn logs gone gray with age. Its windows were empty black squares, and the door hung partially open, swaying slightly though there was no breeze. "That's not on any of the maps," Sam said, her voice suddenly small. I checked our GPS. The screen showed us in the middle of unmarked wilderness. No structures indicated at all. In fact, the GPS seemed to be glitching, the little blue dot of our position jumping around erratically. "We should keep going," Sam said after a moment. "The waterfall should be just beyond here." "Are you kidding? We need to go back." I couldn't explain the dread that had settled in my stomach, but every instinct was screaming at me to turn around. "It's just an old cabin, Matt. Probably from the mining days. This area was full of silver mines in the 1800s. She was already walking toward it. "Sam, stop." But she ignored me. With a muttered curse, I followed. As we got closer to the cabin, I noticed other details. Carved into the wood around the doorframe were strange symbols I didn't recognize. Angular shapes and spirals that seemed to pull at my eyes. And there was a smell. Faint, but distinct. Something metallic and organic, like old blood mixed with soil. Sam reached for the door. "Don't," I said sharply. She turned to me, exasperated. "What is wrong with you? It's just an old cabin. Something doesn't feel right. Those symbols. And that gas station guy specifically warned us not to come this way. Since when do you listen to cryptic warnings from strangers?" She pushed the door fully open with a creak of ancient hinges. The interior was shadow dark, but as my eyes adjusted, I could make out a simple one-room structure. A rusted metal bed frame stood against one wall, a collapsed table and chair against another. A stone fireplace dominated the far wall, its inside blackened not just with age but with what looked like recent use. But what caught my attention were the walls. Every inch was covered with the same strange symbols we'd seen outside, carved directly into the wood. Some were small, delicate, others were huge, spanning the height of the wall. They seemed to shift and move in my peripheral vision, though when I looked directly at any one marking, it remained static. "Sam, we need to go. Now." My voice sounded strange in the enclosed space, too flat, as if the air itself was absorbing the sound. She was moving around the cabin, fascinated. "This is incredible. These markings could be historically significant." She ran her fingers over one of the larger symbols. As soon as she touched it, a sound came from the collapsed fireplace. A soft rustling, like something small moving through ashes. We both froze. "Probably just a mouse," Sam whispered, but she didn't sound convinced. The rustling came again, louder this time, followed by a scraping sound like nails or claws on stone. "We're leaving," I said, grabbing her arm. This time, she didn't resist. We backed toward the door, eyes fixed on the fireplace. Just as we reached the threshold, a cloud of ash and soot erupted from the hearth, billowing upward in a column that defied natural movement. It twisted in the air, forming shapes that almost, but not quite, resolved into a human figure. We ran, out of the cabin, across the clearing, and back onto the trail, not stopping until the cabin was well out of sight. Only then did we pause, bent over, hands on our knees, gasping for breath. What was that?" Sam panted, her earlier bravado gone. "I don't know, and I don't want to find out." My heart was hammering against my ribs. "We're going back. Now." For once, she didn't argue. We turned and started retracing our steps, moving as quickly as the rough trail would allow. But something was wrong. The path looked different somehow. Narrower, the undergrowth thicker, as if we were on a different trail altogether. "Are you sure this is the way we came?" Sam asked after about 20 minutes of hiking. I checked the GPS again. The screen was completely glitched now, showing our position jumping wildly across the map. "I think so. We just need to get back to the lightning-struck pine. Then we'll know we're on the right track." We pushed on, the canyon walls seeming to close in around us. The light was fading faster than it should have, shadows deepening among the trees. And there was something else, a sensation of being watched that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Matt!" Sam's voice was tight with fear. "Look at your watch." I glanced down. My watch showed 7:45 p.m. That couldn't be right. It had been just after 2 p.m. when we found the cabin. "Your watch too?" Sam showed me hers. 7:45 p.m. as well. "We must have been in that cabin longer than we thought," I said, trying to sound rational, though I knew we'd only been inside for a few minutes. "Or something's wrong with time here," Sam whispered. The thought sent a chill through me. I pulled out my phone to check the time there, but there was no signal, and the clock showed the same impossible hour. "We need to hurry. Find a place to camp before it gets completely dark." I tried to sound calm for Sam's sake, but panic was building inside me. We hiked faster, stumbling over roots and rocks in our haste. The light continued to fade at an unnatural rate, and soon we were using our headlamps. Their beams seemed oddly absorbed by the darkness, illuminating far less than they should have. "Matt, I don't recognize any of this," Sam said, her voice trembling. "We should have reached that pine tree by now." She was right. We'd been hiking for at least an hour, much longer than it had taken us to reach the cabin from the tree. Either we were going in circles, or the trail had somehow changed. "We'll make camp," I decided. "Things will look clearer in daylight." We found a small clearing off the trail and quickly set up our tent. Neither of us was hungry, but we forced down some trail mix and jerky, needing the energy. As we worked, I noticed something strange about the forest sounds, or rather, The lack of them. No crickets, no rustling of small nocturnal animals, not even the whisper of wind through the trees. The forest was utterly silent. Inside the tent, we lay in our sleeping bags, pressed close together. Neither of us spoke of it, but I knew we were both listening, straining our ears against the unnatural quiet. "I'm sorry," Sam whispered after a long while. "I should have listened to you about turning back." I squeezed her hand. "We'll find our way out tomorrow. Just try to get some sleep." But sleep seemed impossible in that silent forest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those strange symbols from the cabin walls, seeming to move and shift behind my eyelids. I must have dozed off eventually because I jerked awake to Sam's hand gripping my arm painfully tight. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. At first, I heard nothing. Then it came, a soft, rhythmic sound. Footsteps moving slowly through the undergrowth around our tent. Not the four-footed tread of a deer or even a bear, but the deliberate bipedal gait of something walking on two legs. We lay frozen, barely breathing, as the steps circled our tent once, twice, 3 times. Then they stopped, directly in front of the entrance. For an endless moment, there was nothing. Then a shape pressed against the tent fabric. The outline of a hand, but wrong somehow. The fingers too long, the proportions distorted. It traced down the nylon, making a sound like dry leaves sliding against each other. Sam's hand was over her mouth, stifling a scream. I reached slowly, silently for my hunting knife, the only weapon we had. The shape withdrew. We heard the footsteps again, moving away, fading into the distance. Only when they had been gone for several minutes did I allow myself to breathe normally again. "What was that?" Sam's voice was a thread of sound. "I don't know." My own voice shook. "Maybe a hiker." We both knew it wasn't a hiker. No human made footsteps like that, moved like that. Neither of us slept again that night. We lay awake, listening to the silence, jumping at every minute sound. When the first gray light of dawn finally seeped through the tent fabric, it came as an immense relief. We packed up quickly, not bothering with breakfast. The forest looked different in daylight, but no less wrong. The trees seemed twisted in ways I hadn't noticed the day before, their trunks contorted into unnatural shapes. And there was a fog hanging between them, not the clean mountain mist of high elevations, but something thicker, yellowish, that seemed to cling to everything it touched. "Which way?" Sam asked, her face pale beneath her tan. I looked up and down the trail, trying to orient myself. "That way," I said finally, pointing back the way I thought we'd come. "If we keep heading downhill, we should eventually reach the main trail." We set off, moving as quickly as the terrain allowed. The fog thickened as the morning wore on, reducing visibility to 20 or 30 feet. Sounds were muffled, directions distorted. More than once I was sure we were walking in circles, passing the same twisted tree or distinctive rock formation. "Matt," Sam said after we'd been hiking for maybe 2 hours, "I think I see something ahead." I peered through the fog. There was indeed a dark shape looming ahead of us, too angular to be natural. As we got closer, my heart sank. It was the cabin. "How is this possible?" Sam's voice cracked. "We've been walking downhill all morning." I had no answer. It defied all logic, all sense. Yet there it was, exactly as we'd left it, the door still hanging open in invitation or warning. "We need to go a different direction," I said. "Completely different. Let's try due east." I pointed perpendicular to the trail we'd been following. Sam nodded, her eyes never leaving the cabin. "Anything to get away from here." We struck off through the undergrowth, no trail to follow now, just forcing our way through bushes and around trees. It was harder going, but the thought of encountering that cabin again drove us forward. We hiked for hours, the fog never lifting, the sun a vague brightness somewhere above but giving no real warmth. My watch said it was 2 p.m. when Sam stopped suddenly. "Matt," she said quietly, "look." Ahead of us, barely visible through the fog, was the lightning-struck pine. I felt a wave of relief so strong my knees nearly buckled. We found it. The trail back should be just beyond it. We hurried forward, hope giving us renewed energy. But as we reached the blasted tree, my relief turned to confusion, then horror. Beyond the tree was not the trail we'd come in on, but the clearing with the cabin. "This isn't possible," I whispered. "It's like we're trapped in some kind of loop," Sam said, her voice hollow. "No matter which direction we go, we end up back here." We stood there, paralyzed by the impossibility of our situation. The fog swirled around us, seeming almost alive in its movements. And somewhere in the distance, I heard it again, that deliberate bipedal step. "We need shelter," I said suddenly. "It's getting dark again." And it was, though my watch insisted it was only mid-afternoon. The fog was darkening, shadows deepening among the trees. "Not in there," Sam said, looking at the cabin with naked fear. "I'd rather take my chances in the open." I felt the same way, but the footsteps were getting closer, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. "We can't stay exposed, not with whatever that is out there." In the end, necessity overcame fear. We approached the cabin cautiously, every sense alert for danger. The interior was exactly as we'd left it. The rusted bed frame, the collapsed table, the blackened fireplace. The symbols on the walls seemed to writhe and twist in the dim light. We set up our sleeping bags as far from the fireplace as possible, in the corner by the door for a quick escape if needed. Outside, darkness fell with unnatural speed, and with it came the silence. That perfect, absolute silence that seemed to press against our eardrums. "What is happening to us?" Sam whispered, huddled in her sleeping bag. I had no comforting lies to offer. "I don't know, but we'll figure it out tomorrow. We'll find a way out." Neither of us believed it. The night in the cabin was eternal. The darkness was absolute, our headlamps seeming to illuminate nothing beyond a small circle around us. We heard the footsteps again, circling the cabin just as they had circled our tent. But they didn't approach the door, as if whatever was out there couldn't, or wouldn't, enter. At some point, exhaustion overcame fear, and I drifted into a fitful sleep. I dreamed of the symbols on the walls coming to life, crawling over my skin, burrowing beneath it. I woke to Sam shaking me roughly. "Matt, wake up!" I blinked, disoriented. Light was filtering through the cabin's windows, but it was wrong. Too red, like sunset, though it should have been dawn. "What is it?" I sat up, instantly alert at the panic in her voice. "Look at your arms." I looked down and froze in horror. Etched into my skin, as if carved there with a fine blade, were the same symbols that covered the cabin walls. They weren't bleeding, there was no sign of injury, but they were unmistakably there. Lines and curves pressed into my flesh like they'd always been part of me. I looked at Sam and saw she had them too, crawling up her neck, across her cheeks. "What's happening to us?" Her voice was high, tight with terror. Before I could answer, a sound came from the fireplace. That same rustling we'd heard the first time, but louder now, more purposeful. We watched, paralyzed, as ash and soot billowed upward, coalescing into a shape that was almost, but not quite, human. It had a head, arms, legs, but the proportions were wrong. The limbs too long and jointed in too many places, the head too large and oddly shaped. It moved with a jerky, insectile grace, and though it had no visible eyes, I could feel it watching us. "Hello, hikers," it said, its voice like stone grinding against stone. "Welcome to my home." Sam's hand found mine, gripping it so tightly I could feel bones shifting. "What are you?" I managed to ask, my voice a rasp. The thing's head tilted at an impossible angle. "I am Elias Blackbird. Or I was, once. Now I am something else." It gestured with one elongated arm at the symbols on the walls. "My research, my discovery, my transformation. What do you want from us?" Sam's voice was surprisingly steady. The thing, Blackbird, made a sound that might have been laughter. Company. It gets lonely here, in between. And I need vessels. As it spoke, I noticed something else. The symbols on our skin were moving, slowly rearranging themselves like living things. In between what? I asked, trying to keep it talking while I edged toward the door, pulling Sam with me. In between worlds, in between times. Its form rippled, momentarily losing cohesion before solidifying again. I found the old symbols in the silver mine, learned their power, but the ritual went wrong. Now I am trapped here, neither living nor dead, neither then nor now. But you, it moved closer, that wrong hand reaching toward us. You can help me complete the transition. We bolted for the door, but it slammed shut before we reached it. We turned to find Blackbird directly behind us, its form now more solid, more defined. I could make out what might have been a face. Hollow cheeks, a mouth stretched too wide, empty sockets where eyes should be. You cannot leave, it said simply. No one leaves Blackbird Canyon. Not anymore. It reached for Sam, its fingers elongating impossibly as they stretched toward her face. I swung my hunting knife in a desperate arc, slicing through the thing's arm. It made no sound, but its form dispersed into a cloud of ash and soot before reforming a few feet away. Physical weapons cannot harm me, it said, that grinding laugh emerging again. I am beyond such things now. The symbols on our skin were burning now, a deep, bone-cold fire that made me want to tear my own flesh off. Sam was scratching at hers, drawing blood. Stop that, Blackbird said sharply. The markings must remain intact for the ritual. Ritual. The word sent a new wave of fear through me. What ritual? The one that will free me. Allow me to fully transition. I need vessels. Living vessels marked with the symbols. It gestured at us. You will do nicely. I looked around desperately for anything that might help us. My eyes fell on the fireplace, where a small fire was now burning, though I hadn't seen Blackbird light it. The flames were an unnatural blue-green color, casting weird shadows that seemed to move independently of their source. An idea struck me. The symbols, I said to Sam under my breath. They're the key. If we disrupt them… She nodded slightly, you understanding. While Blackbird was monologuing about its discovery in the silver mine decades ago, we inched along the wall toward the fireplace. The miners thought I was mad, it was saying. They tried to stop my work, but I showed them. I showed them all. And then what happened? I asked, keeping its attention while Sam moved closer to the fire. It made a gesture that might have been a shrug. The ritual went wrong. I was caught between. But now, with you, I can complete it. Sam had reached the fireplace. With a swift movement, she grabbed a burning branch and pressed it against one of the larger symbols carved into the wall. The wood began to smoke and char, the symbol distorting. Blackbird shrieked, a sound like metal tearing, and its form wavered violently. Stop! You'll destroy everything! Sam continued burning the symbols while I kept Blackbird at bay, swinging the knife to disperse its form whenever it tried to approach her. Each symbol she destroyed seemed to cause it physical pain, its form becoming less stable, more transparent. The book! It shrieked suddenly. Stop her from reaching the book! For the first time, I noticed an ancient leather-bound volume half hidden in the collapsed fireplace. Sam saw it too and lunged for it. Blackbird moved with impossible speed, reforming between her and the book. But I was ready. I threw myself forward, passing through its insubstantial form. It was like moving through freezing mist, but I reached the book and tossed it to Sam. She caught it and immediately threw it into the heart of the fire. The leather binding curled and blackened, pages flaring with that same unnatural blue-green flame. Blackbird's scream this time was deafening, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Its form completely lost cohesion, expanding into a churning mass of ash and shadow that filled the cabin from floor to ceiling. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Sam's hand. We burst through the door and into the clearing, not stopping to look back. Behind us, the cabin was enveloped in those strange flames, burning far more quickly than natural wood should. The fire cast no heat, but the symbols on our skin were burning hotter in response, like they were being called back to their source. We ran blindly through the forest, no thought now except to put distance between ourselves and that place. The fog seemed thinner, the trees less twisted. After what felt like hours of running, we stumbled onto a trail. A real trail, wide and well-maintained. "Is this?" Sam gasped. "The main trail," I confirmed, recognizing a distinctive rock formation nearby. "We're back." We didn't slow down, continuing to follow the trail downhill, toward the trailhead where we'd left our car. The burning in our skin gradually subsided, and when I dared to look, I saw the symbols were fading, like ink washing away in the rain. It was fully dark by the time we reached the car, but a normal darkness, with stars overhead and the distant lights of Austin visible in the valley below. We threw our packs in the trunk and got in, both of us trembling with exhaustion and residual fear. "Do you think it's over?" Sam asked as I started the engine. I looked back up the dark mountain road. "I don't know, but I'm not coming back to find out." We drove straight through the night, stopping only for gas, neither of us wanting to stay a minute longer in that area than necessary. By dawn, we were halfway to San Francisco, the mountains of central Nevada receding in the rearview mirror. The symbols on our skin continued to fade over the next few days until they disappeared completely. Sometimes I think I see them reappear in my peripheral vision, but when I look directly, there's nothing there. Sam says she experiences the same thing. We never talk about what happened in Blackbird Canyon, never discuss the thing that called itself Elias Blackbird, or how time seemed to bend around that place, or the impossible cabin that couldn't be escaped. But sometimes I wake in the night to find Sam tracing patterns on her skin where the symbols used to be, her eyes distant and haunted. And sometimes, in the deepest part of night, I hear footsteps circling our apartment, slow, deliberate bipedal steps that pause outside our bedroom door, but they never enter. Not yet. I've researched Elias Blackbird since we returned. There was indeed a silver miner by that name who disappeared in the Toyabe Range in 1879. According to local newspaper archives, he'd become obsessed with strange markings he'd found deep in one of the mines, markings that supposedly predated any known human settlement in the area. The article mentioned that before his disappearance, Blackbird had built a cabin in a remote canyon, which locals subsequently avoided. They claimed to hear unnatural sounds coming from it at night, and several people who ventured near it were never seen again. Eventually, a posse was formed to investigate, but they reported finding the cabin empty, with bizarre carvings covering every surface. They burned it to the ground. Yet somehow, over 100 years later, Sam and I found that same cabin, intact. I don't know if we destroyed Blackbird or merely disrupted whatever ritual he was attempting. I don't know if burning the book ended the threat or only delayed it. All I know is that I will never set foot in those mountains again. And if you're planning a hiking trip in central Nevada, stay on the main trails. And whatever you do, if you see a lightning-struck pine in a place called Blackbird Canyon, turn around. Turn around and don't look back. Because some places are untouched for a reason, and some things, once awakened, never truly go back to sleep. My name is Robert Johnson, and I am 34 years old. This happened in Echo Canyon, Nevada, just 3 months ago. I still wake up drenched in sweat, hearing those whispers. I'd planned this solo hiking trip for months, a 2-week trek through the remote wilderness of the Shell Creek Range in eastern Nevada. After my divorce was finalized, I needed distance from everything. From Sarah's tearful accusations, from the empty house, from the pitying looks of colleagues. The mountains called to me with their promise of solitude and clarity. My route would take me through Echo Canyon, a stunning but rarely traveled stretch that locals seemed oddly reluctant to discuss. "Beautiful area," they'd say, then immediately change the subject. I didn't think much of it at the time. I parked my Subaru at the trailhead near Ely, Nevada. The late September air carried the first hint of autumn crispness. Perfect hiking weather. I shouldered my pack, checked my GPS one last time, and headed into the wilderness with a sense of liberation. The first 3 days were exactly what I needed. The physical exertion of climbing, the sight of golden aspen groves shimmering in the breeze, the absolute quiet except for my own footsteps and breathing. I set up camp each night under brilliant stars, feeling the knot of anxiety in my chest gradually loosening. On the 4th day, I entered Echo Canyon proper. The trail narrowed as it wound between towering limestone walls that seemed to reach for the sky. I noticed strange markings on some of the rock faces. Not modern graffiti, but old symbols etched deep into the stone. They resembled stick figures with elongated limbs and misshapen heads. Native American petroglyphs, I assumed, though something about them felt wrong. That night, I made camp near a small stream. As darkness fell, I became aware of how the canyon walls seemed to trap and amplify sounds. The gentle babble of the stream echoed until it sounded like distant whispering. The effect was unsettling enough that I put in earplugs before sliding into my sleeping bag. I woke suddenly at 3:17 a.m. I remember checking my watch, with the absolute certainty that someone was standing just outside my tent. I lay frozen, straining to hear through my earplugs. When I finally worked up the courage to remove them, the whispering hit me immediately. Not the stream, but actual whispers, too faint to make out words but unmistakably human, or at least they seemed human. "Hello," I called out, my voice embarrassingly weak. The whispers stopped instantly. I unzipped the tent with trembling hands and peered out. The moonlight cast everything in silver and shadow. Nothing moved. I told myself it was just the stream, just the wind, just my imagination working overtime in this strange acoustic environment. I didn't fall back asleep. The next morning, I found footprints around my campsite. Not boot prints, but barefoot impressions, smaller than my own, as if made by a child or a small woman. They circled my tent completely before heading up a nearly vertical rock face where no one should have been able to climb. I should have turned back then. God, why didn't I turn back? Instead, I pressed deeper into the canyon, telling myself I was being ridiculous. Probably just another hiker playing a prank. Maybe local kids who knew these canyons well enough to navigate them at night. The rational explanations didn't explain the growing dread I felt, but I clung to them anyway. That day, hiking became increasingly difficult. The main trail seemed to fade in and out, sometimes disappearing completely before I found it again. My GPS began glitching, showing me in impossible locations, once even indicating I was moving rapidly when I was standing still. The battery, which should have lasted the entire trip, drained to 30% by midday. I also began to notice small cairns, stacks of rocks that hadn't been there when I passed areas earlier. They appeared behind me, as if someone was following my path and marking it. By evening, I was exhausted and on edge. I set up camp in a small clearing with good visibility, building a larger-than-necessary fire. As darkness fell, I found myself constantly scanning the shadows beyond the firelight. The whispering started earlier that night, just as dusk deepened into true darkness. This time, it seemed to come from multiple directions. Above me, from deeper in the canyon, from just behind nearby bushes. I strained to understand the words, but they remained just beyond comprehension. I called out again, with more force this time. "I know someone's there. Show yourself." The whispering stopped, replaced by complete silence. Even the natural sounds of the canyon, insects, the distant stream, fell quiet. The silence was somehow worse than the whispers. Then my phone, which had no signal and which I'd turned off to save battery, chimed with a text message notification. With shaking hands, I turned it on to see a message from an unknown number. "Don't look up, Robert." Of course, I immediately looked up. Nothing was there, just the canyon walls and stars. When I looked back at my phone, the message was gone. No record of it in my text history. I might have thought I imagined it if not for the fact that my phone had been off. Sleep was impossible. I sat with my back against a boulder, knife in hand, watching the fire slowly die. In the darkest hour of night, I heard something shuffling around the perimeter of my camp. Occasionally, branches would snap, or pebbles would skitter down the canyon walls. Whatever it was keeping just outside the fading circle of firelight. As gray dawn finally broke, I packed up hastily and continued my trek, now solely focused on getting through the canyon as quickly as possible. According to my map, I should reach the wider valley beyond Echo Canyon by nightfall if I maintained a good pace. But the trail kept changing. Landmarks I remembered passing appeared again, as if I was walking in circles despite maintaining a consistent direction. The sun seemed to move too slowly across the sky. By midday, I knew something was very wrong. I should have covered much more distance than I had. That's when I found the first artifact, a small, crudely made doll fashioned from twigs and what looked like human hair hanging from a juniper branch directly in my path. The face was made from a piece of smooth stone with features etched into it, 2 deep holes for eyes, a slash for a mouth. It bore an unsettling resemblance to me, the same build, similar hair. I hurried past it, only to find another 50 yards later, and another. Soon they lined the path, hanging from branches, perched on rocks, all facing me as I passed, all resembling me in increasingly accurate ways. Then I found the shrine. In a small alcove in the canyon wall, someone had created an elaborate arrangement of stones, bones, and more of those disturbing dolls. In the center was a large, flat stone with a crude drawing in what looked horribly like dried blood, a stick figure man surrounded by many elongated, inhuman shapes. The man's head was separate from his body. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I photographed everything with my nearly dead phone. Evidence. I needed evidence that I wasn't going insane. The whispers returned in broad daylight, louder now, coming from the shrine itself. And this time, I could make out words. "Stay with us, Robert. We've been so lonely." I ran. Blind panic propelled me down the trail, stumbling over rocks, crashing through underbrush. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, I realized with horror that I was standing right back at the shrine. The largest doll now held my compass in its twisted twig hands. That's when I heard the singing. A high, sweet voice that sounded like a young girl's, coming from further up the canyon. The melody was simple, almost nursery rhyme-like, but in no language I recognized. Against every instinct screaming at me to go back the way I came, I found myself moving toward the voice. I rounded a bend in the canyon and saw her, a small figure sitting on a boulder about 50 yards ahead. She appeared to be a girl of perhaps 10 or 11, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned dress, her dark hair hanging loose down her back. She swung her legs casually as she sang. "Hello," I called, relief washing over me despite the strangeness of finding a child alone out here. "Are you lost? Where are your parents?" She stopped singing but didn't turn around. "They're coming," she said, her voice echoing strangely. "They're almost here." "Who's coming? Is someone playing tricks on me?" I approached cautiously. "You shouldn't have ignored the warnings, Robert," she said. "The symbols on the rocks, the footprints, the dolls. We try to give chances." I stopped about 20 feet from her. Something was very wrong with how her voice sounded, like multiple voices speaking in unison, with something deeper underneath the childish tone. What are you?" I whispered. She turned then, and I saw her face. Or rather, the absence of a face. Where features should have been was only smooth, blank skin, with just the slightest indentations where eyes should be. "We are the Echo people," she said, her voice now coming from somewhere behind me. I spun around to find her standing there, though I'd never heard her move. We've been here since before the canyon, when this was all ocean. We shaped the rock with our voices. We called to the water to leave. We sing, and the world listens. I backed away, only to bump into something solid. Turning again, I found myself facing a tall, emaciated figure with the same featureless face, its limbs too long, fingers like twigs. It wore what looked like the tattered remains of clothes from another century. "You have a beautiful voice, Robert," it said, the words somehow forming without lips. "We heard you calling to us, heard the pain in your heart, the loneliness." More figures emerged from behind rocks, from crevices too small to hold them, all with those blank faces, all with bodies that moved wrong, jerky yet fluid, like stop-motion animation. "I didn't call to anyone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I gripped my knife. "I just want to pass through." The child figure laughed, the sound bouncing off the canyon walls until it seemed to come from everywhere. "Everyone who comes here calls to us, whether they know it or not. The sad ones, the broken ones, the lost ones. Their pain echoes, and we answer." They were surrounding me now, a dozen or more of the echo people closing in slowly. "What do you want from me?" I managed to ask. The tallest one, who seemed to be some kind of leader, reached out with those impossible fingers. "We want your voice, Robert Johnson. We want your echo to join ours. We've been collecting voices for a very long time." I noticed then that the whispering had returned, hundreds of overlapping voices coming from these creatures, speaking words in languages both familiar and alien. With horrible clarity, I understood. These beings were wearing the voices of those they'd taken before. The tall one's hand was inches from my throat when I slashed with my knife. The blade passed through its arm like it was made of smoke, but the creature recoiled anyway, emitting a high-pitched sound that made my ears ring. The others backed away momentarily, and I saw my chance. I ran again, ducking and weaving through the echo people, feeling cold spots where my body passed through their insubstantial forms. Their voices rose in a terrible chorus behind me, no longer whispering but wailing, the sound pursuing me like a physical force. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed meaningless in that canyon. The sun remained fixed overhead despite what must have been hours passing. My GPS was dead. My phone was dead. Even my watch had stopped. I navigated by instinct alone, choosing forks in the canyon that seemed to lead downward, hoping to find an exit. The echo people followed, always just out of sight but never out of hearing. Their voices were a constant presence, sometimes fading to near silence only to surge back louder than before. They called to me using voices I recognized, my parents, my ex-wife, old friends. How they knew these voices, I'll never understand. As exhaustion took its toll, I began to hallucinate. Or at least, I pray, they were hallucinations. I saw faces in the rock walls, mouths opening and closing silently. I saw my own footprints in the dirt ahead of me, as if I'd already passed this way. Worst of all, I occasionally caught glimpses of myself standing on ridges above, watching my desperate flight with that same blank, featureless face. Night fell suddenly, as if someone had flipped a switch. One moment it was day, the next, complete darkness. I stumbled into a small cave, too exhausted to continue. Using the last of my strength, I gathered stones to build a partial wall across the entrance, then collapsed behind it. The voices surrounded the cave all night, singing, whispering, pleading, threatening. They called me brother and friend. They promised an end to loneliness. They described what it felt like to become one of them, the ecstasy of surrendering your individual voice to their chorus, the joy of eternal communion. I covered my ears and screamed my own name, over and over, desperate to remember who I was, terrified that their voices were beginning to make sense, that their offers were beginning to sound appealing. Dawn came as suddenly as night had fallen. In the gray light, I saw that the stones I'd placed across the cave entrance had been rearranged into another shrine, with a doll at its center. This one was the most detailed yet. a perfect miniature of me, down to the scar on my left hand from a childhood accident. My driver's license was clutched in its twig fingers. Something in me broke then. I smashed the shrine, tore the doll to pieces, and ran from the cave screaming defiance. The canyon echoed with my voice, throwing it back at me distorted and changed. I no longer cared about finding the trail. I simply scrambled up the nearest slope that looked remotely climbable, determined to get out of the canyon by any means necessary. The slope was treacherous. Loose shale that slid under my feet. Sparse vegetation that came away in my hands when I grabbed for it. Several times I fell, sliding back down, tearing my hands and knees. The voices followed, now openly mocking, saying I'd never escape, that the canyon would keep me forever. After what seemed like hours of climbing, my hands bloody and my water gone, I reached a ridge that let me see beyond the confines of Echo Canyon. In the distance, perhaps a mile away, I could see my intended trail winding through open country. Hope surged through me, giving me renewed strength. That's when I heard Sarah's voice, my ex-wife, clear as day, from just behind me. "Robert, please, I've been so worried." I turned, knowing it couldn't be her, knowing it was a trick. But it was her, or something wearing her appearance perfectly. She stood a few feet away, tears in her eyes, hand outstretched. "You disappeared weeks ago," this false Sarah said. "Everyone's been searching. I knew you were hurting after the divorce, but to come out here alone. Please, just come home." For one insane moment, I almost believed it was really her, that somehow I'd lost track of far more time than I thought. But then I saw the others gathering behind her, the Echo people in their true forms, watching, waiting. "You're not her," I said. "Sarah would never come looking for me." The thing wearing Sarah's face smiled sadly. "Because of what you did? I've forgiven you, Robert, for the lies, for the other women, for the night you put your hands on me." Ice filled my veins. How could they know about that? The shameful moment I'd never told anyone about? The reason she'd finally left? "We know everything now, Robert," Not Sarah continued, her voice gentle. "We heard your pain, your regret echoing through the canyon. We can take it away, make you new, part of something larger." One of her hands reached for me, while the other gestured to the Echo people behind her. No more loneliness, no more guilt, just belonging. For a heartbeat, I wavered. The offer was seductive. To shed my failures, my shame, my isolation. To never have to face the consequences of who I was and what I'd done. Then I saw a flicker, just the briefest moment when Sarah's face seemed to slip, revealing the blank visage beneath. The spell broke. "No," I said firmly, backing toward the ridge's edge. "I choose my own redemption." Her face contorted with rage, the disguise falling away completely to reveal the featureless horror beneath. The Echo people surged forward as one, their voices rising in a deafening cacophony. I turned and half ran, half slid down the other side of the ridge, away from the canyon. Loose rocks tumbled with me, a miniature avalanche carrying me down faster than was safe. I lost control, rolling and bouncing painfully down the slope, expecting at any moment to feel those twig fingers close around my ankle. The impact when I hit the bottom knocked the wind from me. I lay there gasping, waiting for the Echo people to descend upon me. But the only sound was my own ragged breathing and the settling of disturbed rocks. Painfully, I pulled myself up and looked back. The ridge was empty. No Sarah, no Echo people, just the wind moving through scraggly pines. I limped away from Echo Canyon as quickly as I could, eventually finding my intended trail. I didn't stop to rest, eat, or treat my injuries until I was miles away, out in open country where I could see in all directions. Even then, I jumped at every sound, convinced the whispering would start again at any moment. 2 days later, I staggered into the small town of McGill, Nevada. The locals stared at my wild appearance, Torn clothes, sunburned face, cuts and bruises everywhere. I must have looked deranged as I babbled about voices in the canyon and people with no faces. The sheriff, a man named Tom Blackwood, took me aside at the diner where I'd collapsed into a booth. Instead of dismissing my story, he listened quietly, his weathered face grave. When I finished, he sighed deeply. "You're not the first, Mr. Johnson. Every few years, someone comes out of Echo Canyon with stories like yours. Some don't come out at all." "You believe me?" I asked incredulously. "Let's just say I respect that canyon enough to stay the hell away from it," he replied. "My grandfather was Shoshone. He called that place the Canyon of Stolen Breaths. Said the voices there were the souls of those who'd been taken, trying to warn others away." He helped me contact my emergency contact, my brother in Salt Lake City, who came to bring me home. The sheriff advised me not to spread my story too widely. "Some things people aren't ready to hear," he said, "and some things once heard can't be unheard." I took his advice, telling my brother and others that I'd simply gotten lost and dehydrated. My phone was never recovered, so the photos of the shrine were lost. The physical evidence of my ordeal, the cuts, bruises, and weight loss, could easily be attributed to a wilderness mishap. But I know what happened. I know what waits in Echo Canyon. Sometimes, in the darkest hours of night, I still hear the whispering. It seems to come from the heating vents, or the sink drain, or the darkest corners of my room. Always just slightly too quiet to make out words, but growing gradually louder. Last week, I found a small twig doll on my doorstep. I burned it immediately. Yesterday, my phone received a text from an unknown number. "We miss your voice, Robert. The echo fades. We'll find another way out." I've moved 3 times since Echo Canyon. I've changed my phone number twice, but somehow they always find me. The Echo people are patient, and sound travels farther than you think. If you're reading this and planning a hike in Nevada's backcountry, stay away from Echo Canyon. If you hear whispering, run. And if you hear your own voice calling to you from the darkness, whatever you do, don't answer. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the remote wilderness of the Monitor Range in central Nevada, an area I had foolishly believed would provide the solitude I needed. The towering pines swayed overhead as I pulled my pickup truck off Route 50, known as the loneliest road in America. The gravel crunched beneath my tires as I followed the narrow Forest Service road into the heart of the Monitor Range, a remote mountain chain stretching across Nye County. My chocolate lab, Duke, pressed his nose against the passenger window, tail wagging with anticipation at the prospect of open wilderness. This trip was meant to be healing. 3 months after my divorce was finalized, I still couldn't sleep through the night in my empty house. My therapist had suggested a change of scenery, something to break the cycle of rumination. A week-long camping trip deep in Nevada's backcountry seemed perfect. No cell service, no reminders, just me, Duke, and the wilderness. I'd researched this area extensively. The Monitor Range offered seclusion with its hidden valleys and abandoned mining claims, far from tourist trails. A colleague who'd grown up in Eureka had mentioned Mosquito Creek, a pristine area where few ventured due to its difficult access. Perfect. The Forest Service road deteriorated the farther I drove, until it was little more than a pair of ruts winding through sagebrush and juniper. The truck bounced violently as we climbed higher into the mountains. Duke whined, either from excitement or concern. I couldn't tell. The GPS on my dashboard flickered, then went dark. I wasn't concerned. I had paper maps and knew the general direction. By mid-afternoon, I reached a small clearing beside Mosquito Creek. The water ran clear and cold over smooth stones, and pine trees provided dappled shade. No signs of other humans, no trash, no fire rings, no footprints. Perfect isolation. "What do you think, buddy?" I asked Duke as he bounded from the truck, immediately sticking his nose to the ground. "Home for the next week?" I set up camp with practiced efficiency, pitching my four-season tent on a flat spot, arranging my cooking gear near a natural stone fire ring I'd constructed, and hanging my food cache from a tall pine. Basic wilderness protocols. As the sun began to sink behind the jagged ridgeline, I built a small fire and heated a simple dinner of dehydrated beef stew. Duke settled beside me, his warm presence comforting as darkness enveloped the mountains. That first night passed uneventfully, though I woke several times to Duke's ears perking up at distant sounds, probably deer or other wildlife. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect hiking weather. After breakfast, we set out to explore the surrounding area, following Mosquito Creek upstream toward its source. The creek wound through increasingly narrow canyons, the terrain growing steeper with each mile. Towering limestone cliffs rose on either side, their pale faces streaked with black mineral deposits. The place felt ancient, untouched. I spotted what appeared to be old pictographs on one rock face, red ochre handprints and strange stick figures with elongated limbs, an unexpected discovery that sent a flutter of excitement through me. "Look at that, Duke," I said, photographing the images. "Western Shoshone, maybe?" Duke seemed uninterested, instead fixating on something farther up the canyon, his body tense. "What is it, boy?" I followed his gaze but saw nothing unusual, just shadows playing across the rock face. Still, his behavior gave me pause. Duke was normally relaxed in the wilderness. He'd been my camping companion for years. We continued another mile before turning back, my backpack now containing interesting rocks and pine cones, simple souvenirs. As we descended, I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. Several times I turned sharply, expecting to catch someone or something in my peripheral vision. Each time, there was nothing. Back at camp, I noted with unease that something seemed off. My tent remained untouched, my supplies undisturbed, yet something felt wrong. It took several minutes before I realized what it was. Absolute silence. No birdsong, no insect buzzing, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Even the creek seemed to flow more quietly than it had that morning. Just the time of day, I told myself aloud, needing to hear a human voice, even my own. Duke stayed unusually close to my side as I prepared dinner. That night, I dreamed of the pictographs. In my dream, the elongated figures pulled themselves from the rock face, their limbs impossibly thin and jointed in too many places. They circled something on the ground, something I couldn't quite see but knew was suffering. I woke with a start around 2 a.m., according to my watch. Duke was sitting upright, staring fixedly at the tent wall. "What's wrong, boy?" I whispered, instinctively keeping my voice low. Outside, something moved, a heavy, dragging sound followed by what might have been labored breathing. My mind cycled through possibilities. Bear, mountain lion, maybe a lost hiker? I reached for my flashlight and hunting knife. "Hello?" I called, louder than I intended. "Someone there?" The sound stopped immediately. Duke growled, a low rumble I rarely heard from him. I unzipped the tent just enough to shine my light outside. The beam caught nothing unusual, just my campsite, silvered by moonlight. After several minutes of tense silence, I convinced myself it had been an animal passing through. I fell into uneasy sleep with one hand on Duke's back. Dawn brought no relief. I woke to find small, strange arrangements just outside my tent. Pine needles formed into perfect circles, small stones stacked in impossible balances. Most disturbing was a crude figure made from twigs bound with what appeared to be strands of hair, not animal hair, but long human hairs, dark like my own. "Probably just kids," I muttered unconvincingly. No children would be this deep in the wilderness. Duke refused to approach the items, giving them a wide berth as he paced the campsite perimeter. I decided to break camp and move to a different location. Something about this place suddenly felt wrong, unwelcoming. As I began dismantling my tent, I heard a sound that froze my blood. A child's laughter, high and clear, coming from just beyond the tree line. "Hello?" I called again, searching for a logical explanation. "Is someone there?" The laughter came again, followed by what sounded like singing. A girl's voice, sweet but somehow discordant. The words unintelligible. Duke barked sharply, his hackles raised. I grabbed my camera and moved cautiously toward the sound. The dense pines created a green twilight even in morning sun. 20 yards from camp, I found small footprints in a patch of mud, a child's bare feet, heading deeper into the forest. The prints seemed oddly deep, as if whoever made them carried significant weight. "Hey," I called. "Are you lost? I can help you." The singing stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. I stood motionless, straining to hear anything. Breaking twigs, rustling leaves, anything to indicate which direction this lost child might have gone. Then Duke whined, a frightened sound I'd never heard from him before. I turned to find him staring upward. Following his gaze, my heart nearly stopped. 20 feet up a pine tree, a small figure perched on a branch, a girl of perhaps 8 or 9, wearing what appeared to be a tattered white nightgown. Her hair hung in dark tangles around a pale face. At this distance, I couldn't make out her features clearly, but something about her posture seemed wrong, too fluid, like her limbs weren't quite solid. "Hey there," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Are you okay? How did you get up there?" The girl tilted her head at an impossible angle, nearly 180 degrees, her neck bending in a way no human neck could bend. Then she smiled. I could see the white flash of it even from below, and spoke in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Michael," she said, my name sounding like shards of glass in her mouth. "You shouldn't be here. This is where the lost ones stay." Ice flooded my veins. I hadn't told anyone my name. I hadn't seen another soul since entering this range. "Who are you?" I demanded, fear making my voice harsh. "Where are your parents?" The girl laughed again, the sound like water over stones. "I've been here since 1887. The shaft collapsed. Papa never found me." My mind raced to make sense of this. An old mining accident? A child's ghost? Or was I having some kind of breakdown, seeing things that weren't there? "I'm going to help you," I said, though I had no idea how. "Just stay there." The girl's smile widened unnaturally. "We don't want help. We want company." With that, she moved, not climbing down but simply dropping from the branch, falling with the limp heaviness of something dead. I lunged forward, thinking to catch her, but before she hit the ground, she changed. Her form seemed to ripple, becoming something else, a dark shape that darted between the trees with unnatural speed, leaving behind the scent of damp earth and decay. Duke barked frantically, pulling at his leash toward camp. I followed, my heart hammering against my ribs. When we reached the clearing, I found my tent collapsed, supplies scattered. Most disturbing were the words scratched into the side of my truck. "Not alone, not ever." That did it. Rational explanations no longer mattered. I threw my essential gear into the truck bed, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage the simplest tasks. Duke jumped into the cab without prompting, his eyes wild, tracking something I couldn't see at the forest's edge. As I started the engine, my rearview mirror caught movement, multiple small figures emerging from between the trees, children of various ages, all pale, all wrong somehow. At their center stood the girl, her head still tilted at that impossible angle, her smile now revealing teeth too sharp, too numerous. I floored the accelerator, the truck fishtailing on the rough track. Through the dust cloud behind me, I swore I saw them following, not running, but moving with a strange gliding motion that seemed too fast for their small frames. The Forest Service road seemed longer on the way out, winding endlessly through identical stands of pine. Twice I took wrong turns, finding myself at dead ends that weren't on my map. The third time this happened, this I stopped to consult my compass, only to find the needle spinning aimlessly, offering no guidance. "We'll follow the creek downstream," I told Duke, who hadn't stopped trembling. "Water always leads to civilization." As I turned the truck around in the narrow space, something heavy landed on the roof. A sharp impact followed by the sound of dragging, like fingernails on metal. Duke howled, a sound of pure terror. I accelerated blindly, branches whipping against the windshield, as whatever was on the roof continued to move, occasionally tapping on the windows as if asking to be let in. I refused to look. I just drove, praying the road would eventually lead to the highway. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, the trees thinned, and I caught sight of asphalt ahead, Route 50. I nearly sobbed with relief. As we reached the junction with the highway, I heard a final thump from the roof, as if something had jumped off. In the rearview mirror, I saw her standing in the middle of the Forest Service road, the girl in the white nightgown, her body bent at unnatural angles, her smile visible even at this distance. She raised one hand in farewell, then stepped backward into the trees, vanishing from sight. I drove east toward Eureka, the nearest town, pushing well above the speed limit on the empty highway. Duke gradually calmed, eventually falling into exhausted sleep on the passenger seat. I, however, couldn't stop checking the mirrors, half expecting to see small figures pursuing us across the sagebrush flats. In Eureka, I checked into the first motel I found, a rundown place that nonetheless felt like luxury after my experience. After bringing in Duke and my remaining gear, I examined the truck's roof by the harsh light of the motel's exterior lamps. Long scratches marred the paint, forming what appeared to be crude letters, "Come back." That night, safely locked in my motel room, I researched the monitor range on my laptop. What I found chilled me despite the room's stuffy warmth. In 1887, the Silver State Mining Company had operated several shafts in the range. One of them, the Mosquito Creek Mine, had collapsed after hitting an underground water source. 9 miners died, along with the mine owner's daughter, 8-year-old Elizabeth Jones, who had been visiting her father that day. Her body was never recovered. Further searches revealed more tragedies in the area over decades. Hikers gone missing, a family of 4 found dead in their tent in 1976 with no cause of death determined, 2 Forest Service rangers who disappeared while investigating reports of strange children in 1992. The Monitor Range, it seemed, collected lost souls. I slept poorly that night despite my exhaustion, waking repeatedly from dreams of children with 2 wide smiles calling my name from the darkness. Duke refused to leave my side, growling at shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. In the morning, I checked out and drove straight to the Eureka County Sheriff's Office. The deputy who took my report listened patiently, his weathered face betraying no judgment as I described my experience. When I finished, he sighed heavily, closing his notebook. "You're not the first, Mr. Williams," he said quietly. "That area, it has a history. Most folks who go up there come back changed if they come back at all." "Then why isn't it restricted?" I demanded. "Why aren't there warnings?" The deputy's expression darkened. "You think we haven't tried? Signs disappear. Barriers get torn down. And frankly, the county doesn't want to advertise that we have a problem area. Bad for tourism, bad for property values." He leaned forward. "My advice, go home, try to forget, and count yourself lucky. Most who see the children of Mosquito Creek don't make it out to tell about it." I took his advice, driving straight through to Reno that day and catching the first available flight home. Duke never fully recovered from our experience. To this day, he growls at children he sees on our walks, something he never did before. As for me, I've mostly convinced myself it was some kind of stress-induced hallucination, almost. Except for one thing. Every night since our return, precisely at 2:17 a.m., my phone receives a text message from an unknown number. It's always the same, a single image of a crudely drawn stick figure with the words, "We miss you, Michael." The lost ones are waiting. I've changed my number 3 times. It makes no difference. And sometimes, when I wake suddenly in the darkness, I swear I can hear distant children's laughter and the faint sound of something, scratching at my bedroom window, asking to be let in. The lost ones are patient, and they never, ever forget. My name is James Anderson, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the Highland Range of Nevada, just east of Pioche. What was supposed to be a weekend of solitude and healing turned into something I still struggle to explain, even to myself. I've always been an introvert, more comfortable with spreadsheets than small talk. Working as an accountant in Las Vegas had taken its toll over the years. The endless noise, the artificial light, the constant pressure. After my divorce from Rachel last year, the panic attacks started. First, just once a week, then almost daily. My therapist suggested I reconnect with nature, find some genuine solitude to process everything. The mind needs silence to heal, Dr. Winters had said. Find somewhere quiet, somewhere you can hear yourself think. I chose the Highland Range because almost no one goes there. It's not a national park, not a tourist destination, just a rugged stretch of wilderness with sparse trails and fewer amenities. Perfect. I packed my gear, took a week off work, and drove my Subaru until the paved roads gave way to gravel, and then to nothing at all. The October air was crisp when I arrived at the trailhead, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the sagebrush. I shouldered my pack, checked my GPS one last time, and started up the trail. My plan was simple. Hike 5 miles to Grizzly Creek, set up camp, and then spend the next 4 days exploring the surrounding canyons and ridges. The first signs something was wrong came that very evening. I'd set up my tent near the creek, started a small fire, and was heating water for my freeze-dried beef stroganoff when I heard something that made me freeze. My name. Just a whisper, barely audible over the bubbling creek, but distinct. James. I whipped around, heart hammering. The light was fading, turning the juniper trees into hunched silhouettes. Nothing moved. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing slightly against the canyon walls. No response. I told myself it was the wind, or my imagination. The mind plays tricks when you're alone in the wilderness. But deep down, I knew I hadn't imagined it. That night, I slept poorly, waking at every sound. The crack of a branch, the call of a night bird, the wind through the pines. But nothing prepared me for what I found in the morning. Surrounding my tent, in a perfect circle about 10 feet in diameter, were dozens of small cairns. Rocks balanced one atop the other, some 3 or 4 stones high. I hadn't noticed them when I'd set up camp, and I'm certain they hadn't been there. Someone had built them while I slept. Someone had been watching me. I should have left then, packed up and hiked back to my car. But I didn't. I told myself there must be a logical explanation. Maybe there were other hikers nearby playing a prank. Maybe I had somehow missed seeing the cairns in the fading light. Instead of leaving, I decided to explore the area, thinking I might find whoever had built the cairns. I packed a day bag and hiked deeper into the canyon, following Grizzly Creek as it wound between towering limestone cliffs. The autumn light was beautiful, golden and clear, but I couldn't shake the sensation of being followed. Every few minutes I would stop and listen, certain I'd heard footsteps behind me, only to be met with silence. Around midday, I reached a small waterfall tumbling into a crystal-clear pool. It was a perfect spot for lunch. I sat on a flat boulder, unwrapped my sandwich, and tried to relax. That's when I noticed the carving. On a smooth section of cliff face, about eye level, someone had carved a crude figure, a stick person with 2 long limbs and a misshapen head. Beneath it were carved the words, "He waits in the cave." The sandwich turned to ash in my mouth. The carving looked old, the edges weathered, but the message felt directed at me. I scanned the cliffs above, looking for any sign of caves. About 100 yards further up the canyon, I could make out a dark opening in the limestone, I should have turned back. But curiosity, that damned human weakness, pushed me forward. The cave entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for me to squeeze through with my day pack. I clicked on my headlamp and stepped inside, the temperature dropping immediately. The beam of light revealed a small chamber about 15 feet across, the floor smooth and sandy. Ancient pictographs covered one wall, red and black figures depicting humans, animals, and strange elongated creatures I couldn't identify. But it was what stood in the center of the chamber that made my blood run cold. Another cairn, this one nearly 4 feet tall and made of perfectly balanced black stones. Atop it sat a small wooden figure. A doll, I realized with growing horror. A doll with my face. It was crude, made from twisted twigs and pine needles, but the resemblance was unmistakable. My receding hairline, my slightly crooked nose from when I broke it playing hockey in college, even the small scar on my chin. Someone had been watching me long before I'd arrived in the Highland Range. Someone knew exactly who I was. I backed away from the cairn, pulse thudding in my ears. That's when I heard it again. My name, whispered from deeper inside the cave. James. There was a passage I hadn't noticed before, a dark crack in the rear wall. The voice seemed to come from there. James, we've been waiting. Terror should have sent me running, but instead, I found myself moving toward the passage as if pulled by an invisible thread. My headlamp revealed rough stone steps descending into darkness. I took one step down, then another. That's it, the voice whispered. Come to us, James. Something brushed against my cheek, soft, like fingertips. I screamed and stumbled backward, dropping my headlamp. It clattered down the stone steps, the light spinning crazily before going out, plunging me into absolute darkness. Panic surged through me. I scrambled on all fours toward where I thought the entrance was. My hands scraped raw from the rough stone. When I finally tumbled out into the sunlight, I ran without looking back, not stopping until I reached my campsite, lungs burning and legs shaking. The cairns around my tent were gone, not knocked over or disassembled, completely gone, as if they'd never been there at all. I collapsed by the creek, splashing water on my face, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had I imagined it all? Was I having some kind of breakdown? As the sun began to set, I made a decision. I couldn't spend another night here. I would pack up and hike back to my car, even if it meant traveling in the dark. But when I returned to my tent, I found something that stopped me cold. My sleeping bag had been removed from the tent and laid out neatly beside the cold fire pit. Placed carefully on top of it was a small leather-bound book, its cover worn and cracked with age. With trembling hands, I picked it up and opened it. The pages were filled with faded handwriting, the ink brown with age. It was a journal, dated 1887. The first entry read, October 17th, 1887. I have taken refuge in these mountains after fleeing Pioche. They will not find me here. I have discovered a cave system that will serve as my sanctuary while I continue my work. The local Paiute avoid this place. They call it the dwelling of Kataka. They say he is an ancient spirit who takes the form of those he wishes to claim. Their superstitions do not concern me, but the cave's unusual properties certainly do. The deeper chambers contain remarkable acoustic phenomena. Whispers travel for hundreds of yards, seemingly from nowhere and everywhere at once. I flipped through more pages, the handwriting becoming increasingly erratic as the entries progressed. The author, who signed himself only as W, described experiments with sympathetic resonance and the threshold between worlds. He believed the cave system acted as a conduit to what he called the other side. The final entry, dated 3 months later, chilled me to the bone. January 23rd, 1888. It speaks with her voice now. Perfect mimicry. I hear Mary calling to me from the lower chamber, though I buried her body in Pioche 6 months ago. I know it is the thing, Kataka, wearing her voice like a man wears a coat. Yet still I am drawn to it. Each day I venture a little deeper, following her voice. I know what awaits me. I know what it wants. Yet I cannot resist much longer. Perhaps tomorrow I will answer its call. Perhaps tomorrow I will finally see my Mary again. That was the last entry. The remaining pages were blank. Night was falling rapidly now, the canyon filling with shadows. I shoved the journal into my pack and began breaking down my tent with frantic haste. I needed to get out of there. That's when my phone, which had shown no service since I'd arrived, suddenly chimed with a text message notification. With shaking hands, I pulled it from my pocket. It was from Rachel, my ex-wife. The message read, "I'm here, James, in the cave. Please come back." The timestamp showed it had been sent just seconds ago. I dropped the phone as if it had burned me. This was impossible. Even if Rachel somehow knew where I was, which she didn't, there was no cell service here. No way for a text to come through, unless it hadn't come through the phone at all. As darkness descended completely, I heard them. Whispers from the surrounding forest. Dozens of voices calling my name. Some familiar, some strange. Among them, unmistakably, was Rachel's voice. "James, please, I miss you. Come to the cave." My father's voice, dead 5 years now. "Son, we're waiting for you." My childhood best friend, Mike, who'd drowned when we were 12. "Remember when we said we'd always find each other, James? I found you." They were coming closer, the whispers becoming clearer. Through the trees, I began to see movement, dark figures slipping between the trunks, their forms indistinct yet horribly familiar. Family, friends, colleagues, all long dead or people I'd left behind, advancing slowly toward my camp. In my panic, I abandoned the half-dismantled tent and most of my gear. Grabbing only my pack with the journal, some water, and my headlamp, I plunged into the darkness, following the creek downstream toward where I'd left my car, miles away. I ran until my lungs burned, stumbling over rocks and roots in the feeble beam of my headlamp. Behind me, the whispers continued, sometimes fading, sometimes so close I could feel breath on the back of my neck. An hour into my desperate flight, the trail veered away from the creek and began climbing a rocky slope. I paused, gasping for breath, and looked back. In the moonlight, I could make out figures moving among the trees below, a dozen or more, their movements jerky and unnatural. They were following the same path I had taken. As I watched in horror, one figure stepped into a clearing, fully visible in the moonlight. It was me, my exact double, wearing the same clothes, carrying an identical pack. But its face was wrong somehow. The features slightly distorted, the smile too wide, the eyes reflecting the moonlight like an animal's. It looked up directly at me and raised a hand in greeting. I scrambled up the slope, loose rocks clattering down behind me. At the top, the trail forked, one path continuing toward the trailhead where my car was parked, the other leading deeper into the mountains. Without thinking, I took the less obvious path, hoping to lose my pursuers. The new trail wound through a dense pine forest before emerging onto a ridge overlooking a vast, moonlit valley. In the distance, I could make out the twinkling lights of a small town. Pioche, I realized. Safety, people, civilization. But it was miles away, across rugged terrain, and I'd have to leave the trail to reach it. Behind me, the whispers continued. Closer now. I had no choice. I left the trail and began making my way down the steep, rocky slope toward the distant lights. What followed was the most harrowing night of my life. Without a trail to follow, I was forced to navigate by moonlight, scrambling down near vertical slopes, forcing my way through thick underbrush, always moving toward those distant lights that never seemed to get any closer. The whispers followed me. Sometimes they seemed to come from directly beside me, though when I whipped around with my headlamp, I saw nothing. Other times they emanated from the darkness ahead, as if they were hurting me. Around 3 in the morning, exhausted and disoriented, I stumbled upon an old mining road. Hope surged through me. This had to lead somewhere. I followed it downhill, moving as quickly as my depleted energy would allow. The road eventually brought me to an abandoned mining camp, a cluster of decaying wooden structures huddled at the base of a cliff. In the moonlight, I could make out the dark mouth of a mine shaft in the cliff face, a pair of rusted tracks leading into it. I approached the largest building, some kind of bunkhouse or office, hoping to find shelter until daylight. The door hung askew on leather hinges, creaking softly in the night breeze. Inside, moonlight filtered through holes in the roof, illuminating a room long abandoned to the elements. Rusted bed frames lined the walls, and a heavy wooden table dominated the center of the room, its surface covered with decades of dust. As I moved further into the room, my headlamp revealed what lay on the table, a familiar leather-bound journal, identical to the one in my pack. With a growing sense of dread, I approached the table. This couldn't be the same journal. Mine was safely in my backpack. I reached for the book with trembling hands and opened it. The handwriting was my own. October 17th, 2023. I have taken refuge in these mountains after fleeing Las Vegas. They will not find me here. I have discovered a cave system that will serve as my sanctuary while I continue my work. The locals avoid this place. They call it the dwelling of Kataka. I slammed the book shut, my mind reeling. The entry was in my handwriting, yet I had never written these words. And the date, this was today's date. A soft thud from outside snapped me back to reality. Footsteps approached the building, slow and deliberate. I extinguished my headlamp and pressed myself against the wall beside the door, heart hammering so loudly I was certain it could be heard across the valley. The footsteps stopped just outside. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a voice, my voice, called softly from the darkness. "I know you're in there, James. You can't hide from me. After all, I am you." The door began to creak open. In desperation, I looked around for a weapon, anything to defend myself. My eyes fell on a rusted pickaxe head leaning against the wall. I grabbed it, the metal cold and heavy in my hand. A figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the night sky. In the dim moonlight, I could make out my own profile, my height, my build, even my backpack. It took a step forward, into a shaft of moonlight, and I saw its face clearly for the first time. It wore my features like an ill-fitting mask, everything in the right place, but somehow wrong. The eyes were the worst part, completely black, without iris or white, like empty holes into nothingness. "Do you understand yet?" it asked, its voice a perfect imitation of mine, but with an underlying echo, as if multiple voices spoke in unison. "Kataka needs a new vessel. Yours will do nicely." It stepped further into the room, moving with a fluid grace that was both familiar and alien. "W understood in the end," it continued, gesturing to the journal on the table. "William Carlyle, a brilliant mind. He served Kataka well for many years before his body failed, just as you will serve." It smiled, a horrible stretching of lips that revealed too many teeth. "Your fear tastes exquisite, James. So much richer than the others who've wandered into these mountains. Your anxiety, your isolation, your broken heart, you're perfect." It extended a hand toward me, the fingers slightly too long, the joints bending in subtle, wrong ways. "Don't fight it. The others are bringing your body to the cave as we speak. The vessel you're currently inhabiting is just a temporary projection, an echo of your true self. Soon, you'll be with us permanently." In that moment, something inside me snapped. If this thing, this Kataka, wanted fear, I wouldn't give it any more. With a roar that surprised even me, I swung the pickaxe head with all my strength. The rusted metal connected with the creature's shoulder, biting deep. But instead of blood, the wound leaked a thick black substance that glistened in the moonlight. The thing wearing my face didn't cry out in pain. It laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "You cannot harm me with mortal tools. James," it said, reaching up to touch the black ooze with curious fingers. "But I admire your spirit. It will make your essence all the more powerful when Kataka claims it." I didn't wait to hear more. While it was distracted by its wound, I shoved past it and ran into the night, heading toward the mine entrance. I had no plan, only the desperate need to get away from my doppelganger. The mine tunnel was a black mouth in the cliff face. Without slowing, I plunged into it, my headlamp beam bouncing wildly off the rough-hewn walls. The air inside was cold and stale, heavy with the scent of mineral deposits and old timbers. Behind me, I could hear my double entering the tunnel, its footsteps unnaturally fast. I pushed deeper into the mountain, past collapsed sections and abandoned mining equipment, the rails beneath my feet guiding my headlong flight. The tunnel began to slope downward, the air growing colder. Water dripped from the ceiling, and the walls glistened with moisture. I realized with growing horror that the mine must connect with the natural cave system, the dwelling of Kataka. Ahead, the tunnel widened into a large chamber. My headlamp revealed mining equipment scattered about, an old ore cart, pickaxes, shovels, all abandoned decades ago when the miners had fled. And on the far wall, a natural opening in the rock, a passage leading deeper into the earth. I was trapped. The only way out was back past my pursuer. As its footsteps grew louder, I frantically searched for somewhere to hide or something to use as a weapon. My light fell on a stack of dynamite boxes in the corner. The wood rotted, but the contents possibly still volatile after all these years. Beside them lay an old miner's lantern. A desperate plan formed in my mind. I positioned myself near the dynamite, the lantern in one hand, a box of ancient matches I'd found nearby in the other. When my double appeared at the chamber entrance, I struck a match. "Stay back," I warned, holding the flame near the lantern's wick, "or I'll blow us both to hell." The creature paused, those black eyes assessing me coolly. "You would destroy yourself to escape Kataka. Impressive, but futile." It took a step forward. I lit the lantern. "This tunnel runs directly under your precious cave," I bluffed, having no idea if this was true. "Collapse it, and your master loses his dwelling place. How long before he finds another? Decades. Centuries." The thing wearing my face went still. For the first time, I sensed uncertainty in it. "You're lying," it said, but there was a question in its voice. "Am I?" I moved the lantern closer to the dynamite. "You said it yourself. I'm broken, isolated. I have nothing left to lose." We stood in tense silence, me with my finger on the trigger of a bomb that might not even work, it with its inhuman strength and speed that could overpower me in seconds. But it didn't move. "What do you want?" it finally asked. "Safe passage out of these mountains," I demanded. "No followers, no whispers. Tell Kataka to find another vessel." The creature's face, my face, contorted with rage. "Kataka does not bargain with cattle." "Then Kataka can find a new home," I said, lowering the lantern toward the dynamite. "Wait!" The word echoed off the stone walls. The creature's form seemed to shimmer, like heat rising from summer asphalt. For a moment, I glimpsed something else beneath my stolen features. Something ancient and terrible, with too many limbs and eyes like wells of darkness. "Passage will be granted," it said, its voice now a multi-layered hiss. "But know this, James Anderson. You have been marked. Should you ever return to these mountains, to any mountains, Kataka will be waiting, and there will be no escape." It backed away into the tunnel, its form melting into the shadows until only those black eyes remained, watching me from the darkness. I stood frozen, the lantern heavy in my hand, waiting for some trick, some attack. But none came. After what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes, I gathered my courage and moved cautiously toward the tunnel entrance. It was empty. I made my way back through the mine, constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to feel cold hands on my neck at any moment. But I encountered nothing. When I emerged into the pre-dawn light, the mining camp was deserted. With the first rays of sun cresting the eastern mountains, I began the long trek toward Pioche, following an old mining road that wound down through the foothills. By mid-morning, I reached the outskirts of town, my clothes torn, my body exhausted, but alive. I spent 3 days in Pioche, recovering in a small motel, before I felt strong enough to rent a car and retrieve my abandoned Subaru from the Highland Range trailhead. When I finally reached it, I found my tent and the gear I'd left behind neatly packed and stacked beside the vehicle, as if by a considerate fellow hiker. On the driver's seat lay the leather journal. I burned it in the parking lot before leaving. That was 6 months ago. I've since moved from Las Vegas to San Diego, as far from mountains as I could reasonably get. I see Dr. Winters twice a week now. She thinks I experienced a severe panic attack in the wilderness, triggering a psychotic episode. The isolation, the stress of my divorce, my history of anxiety, all contributed to a break from reality, she says. Some days I almost believe her. Almost. But there are nights when I wake to whispers in my empty apartment. Nights when I catch a glimpse of my reflection moving independently in a darkened window. And always, there's the knowledge that I've been marked. I can never go back to the mountains. Any mountains. Because something ancient and patient waits there. Something that wears familiar faces and knows your deepest fears. Something that has all the time in the world to wait for your return. My name is James Anderson, and I am marked. If you're hiking in Nevada's Highland Range and you hear someone call your name, run. Don't look back. And whatever you do, stay away from the caves. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the Ruby Mountains of Nevada, during what was supposed to be a weekend of solitude and reflection. I'd been working as a software developer in San Francisco for 8 years, and burnout had crept up on me like a shadow. The constant deadlines, the artificial light, the endless meetings, they were crushing my spirit. When my therapist suggested I take some time off to decompress, I decided a solo hiking trip would be the perfect remedy. The Ruby Mountains seemed like the ideal destination. Located in northeastern Nevada, they were remote enough to offer genuine solitude, yet established enough that I wouldn't be completely off the grid. Their jagged peaks and alpine lakes were a dramatic contrast to the concrete jungle I'd been suffocating in. I'd read about Lemuel Canyon, often called Nevada's Yosemite of the desert, and the photographs of its towering cliffs and lush vegetation had captivated me. I rented a small SUV in Elko and made the 40-minute drive to the Lemuel Canyon trailhead on a Thursday afternoon in early October. The plan was simple: hike the Ruby Crest Trail for 3 days, camping at different locations each night, and return to civilization on Sunday with a refreshed mind and spirit. The weather was perfect when I arrived: crisp autumn air, clear blue skies, and the aspen trees displaying brilliant yellow and orange leaves against the backdrop of granite peaks. As I shouldered my backpack and adjusted the straps, I felt a sense of liberation. For the first time in months, I didn't have to answer to anyone but myself. The first few miles were glorious. The trail followed a creek up through Lemuel Canyon, with impressive views of the U-shaped valley carved by ancient glaciers. I passed Liberty Lake and made steady progress toward my first campsite near Lemuel Lake. Being alone in nature was exactly what I needed. The silence broken only by the whisper of wind through the trees and the occasional call of a bird. I set up camp about an hour before sunset, pitching my tent on a small plateau overlooking the lake. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, I heated a freeze-dried meal on my portable stove and watched the alpenglow paint the peaks in shades of pink and gold. This was perfect. This was healing. After dinner, I gathered firewood and built a small campfire. The nights in the mountains get cold, especially in autumn, and the warmth was comforting as darkness settled around me. I sat beside the flames, listening to the crackle of burning wood and watching sparks spiral upward to join the emerging stars. That's when I first heard it. A sound like distant singing, carried on the night air. It was faint enough that I couldn't make out words, just a melodic quality that seemed to rise and fall like a lullaby. I assumed it was other hikers somewhere down the trail, though I hadn't seen anyone since I'd started my hike. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding strange in the vast stillness. No response came except for the continued singing, which now seemed to be coming from multiple directions at once. I stood up, turning in a slow circle, trying to pinpoint the source. The melody was beautiful but somehow unsettling, like a song played in a minor key, a melody that spiraled downward rather than resolving. "Is anyone there?" I tried again, louder this time. The singing stopped abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence that seemed to press against my eardrums. I waited, straining to hear anything, but there was nothing, not even the usual nocturnal sounds of the wilderness. No insects chirping, no rustling of small creatures in the underbrush. Just nothing. I sat back down by the fire, a vague uneasiness settling in my stomach. Perhaps it had been the wind playing tricks on me, whistling through rock formations in a way that mimicked human voices. That made sense, I told myself, reaching for my metal mug of whiskey. Just the wind. As I sipped my drink, I noticed the fire seemed different somehow. The flames, which had been a healthy orange color, now burned with a bluish tint at their edges. I leaned forward, staring at the unnatural color, wondering if it was something in the wood I'd gathered. I'd read that certain minerals could change the color of flames. Copper turned them green, salt made them yellow, but I'd never heard of anything that made them blue. While I was pondering this, the temperature seemed to drop drastically. My breath suddenly fogged in front of me and the cold bit through my jacket as if it were made of tissue paper. This kind of temperature plunge wasn't unusual in the high desert, but the rapidity of it was startling. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and added more wood to the fire. The flames leapt higher, still with that strange blue tinge, but they gave off little heat. In fact, as I held my hands toward the fire, I felt a chill emanating from it rather than warmth. I jerked my hands back, confused and increasingly alarmed. And then the singing returned. Louder now, clearly coming from the direction of the lake. I stood and shone my flashlight toward the water, but the beam was swallowed by the darkness after just a few feet, as if the night itself had grown thicker. The singing grew more insistent, and though I still couldn't make out words, the tone had changed. What had been melodic now sounded like a dirge, mournful and pleading. A rational part of my brain suggested I get into my tent, zip it up, and wait until morning. Whatever was happening, whether it was a strange atmospheric phenomenon or my own exhausted mind playing tricks on me, would make more sense in daylight. But another part of me, a primal part that operated on instinct rather than logic, urged me to investigate. I compromised, grabbing my trekking poles as makeshift weapons and moving cautiously toward the lake, guided by the sound of the singing rather than my useless flashlight. The path to the lake's edge was short but treacherous in the dark. My boots slipped on loose stones, and branches seemed to reach out and catch at my clothing. All the while, the singing continued, drawing me forward like a fish on a line. When I reached the shore, the singing stopped again, leaving only the gentle lapping of water against rocks. The lake was a black mirror reflecting the stars above, its surface occasionally rippled by a breath of wind. I swept my flashlight across the water, the beam barely penetrating the darkness. "Hello?" I called again, my voice echoing off the mountains surrounding the lake. "Is anyone out there?" As if in response, the water at the center of the lake began to bubble and churn, as if boiling from beneath. I stepped back instinctively, my heart hammering against my ribs. The disturbance grew, spreading outward in concentric circles, and then something began to rise from the depths. At first, I could only make out a dark shape breaking the surface, water cascading off it like a waterfall. But as it continued to rise, My flashlight revealed a figure, unmistakably human in form, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, its proportions stretched like a reflection in a funhouse mirror. It stood on the surface of the water, impossibly, its feet not even breaking the tension of the lake. And it was looking directly at me. I couldn't make out its features clearly, just a pale oval where a face should be, and long, dark hair that hung in wet ropes down to its waist. It raised one elongated arm, pointing at me with a finger that seemed too long, too jointed. And then it began to walk across the water toward the shore, toward me. My body unfroze in an instant, and I turned and ran, tripping and stumbling back to my campsite. The singing had started again, but now it came from all around me, a chorus of voices rising and falling in that same mournful dirge. As I burst into the clearing where my tent stood, I saw that my campfire had gone out completely, not even embers remaining in the circle of stones. I grabbed my backpack, not bothering with the tent or any of my other gear. All I wanted was to get away from this place, away from whatever was coming across the lake toward me. I fumbled for my headlamp, strapped it on, and oriented myself toward the trail that would take me back to the trailhead. But as I turned to leave, a figure stood in my path. It wasn't the entity from the lake. This was a man, dressed in old-fashioned clothing that seemed out of place in the wilderness. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face, and his clothes were dusty, as if he'd been traveling for a long time. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice cracked and dry. "Not on this night." I took a step back, my hand closing around one of my trekking poles. "Who are you?" "Name's Jeremiah Blackwood," he said, not moving from his position blocking the trail. "Used to mine these mountains back in '67. 1967? I asked, confused. The man looked too old to have been mining in the '60s. A wheeze escaped him that might have been a laugh. 1867, son. Gold Rush days. Died here too, but that's another story." I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized what he was saying. I was talking to a ghost, or hallucinating one, which seemed equally terrifying at that moment. "You need to leave," Jeremiah continued. "It's the dark of the moon, and they come out on nights like this." "Who comes out?" "The singing ones, the water folk. They lure travelers with their songs, drag 'em down to the depths." He gestured toward the lake with a gnarled hand. "Been doing it since before my time, before white men came to these mountains. The Shoshone had stories about 'em, called 'em water babies." I'd read about water babies in my research for the trip, a legend among the indigenous peoples of the Great Basin. They were said to be the spirits of unwanted children, drowned in lakes and streams, who now lured unsuspecting travelers to watery graves. "This is crazy," I muttered, more to myself than to Jeremiah. "I'm losing my mind." "Crazy or not, you need to go," Jeremiah insisted. "They've marked you now, heard your voice. They'll follow you until they get what they want." "What do they want?" Jeremiah looked at me as if I were a particularly slow student. "Your life, son. Your breath, your warmth. They want what the living have that the dead don't." A loud splash came from the direction of the lake, followed by the sound of something heavy dragging itself onto shore. The singing had stopped again, replaced by a wet, slithering sound that was somehow worse. "Too late," Jeremiah said, looking past me toward the lake. "They're coming. Run for higher ground. They can't go too far from water." And then he was gone, simply not there anymore, leaving me alone with the approaching horror from the lake. I ran. I abandoned the trail, scrambling up the steep slope of the nearest ridge, driven by pure fear. Branches whipped my face, thorns tore at my clothing, but I didn't slow down. Behind me, I could hear the slithering, squelching sounds growing closer, punctuated now by high, keening vocalizations that might have been words in a language never meant for human tongues. My lungs burned, and my legs trembled with exhaustion, but I forced myself to keep climbing. Jeremiah had said to seek higher ground, away from water. I had to believe him. I had no other guidance in this nightmare. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I reached a rocky outcropping that jutted from the mountainside. I pulled myself up onto it, gasping for breath, and looked back the way I'd come. What I saw nearly stopped my heart. Climbing the slope behind me were three figures, vaguely human in shape but moving with a horrible, fluid grace that no human could achieve. Their limbs bent at impossible angles as they navigated the rough terrain, and their pale skin gleamed in the moonlight like the belly of a fish. Their faces were smooth ovals, featureless except for wide black eyes and mouths that seemed too large, too flexible, stretching into exaggerated grins that revealed rows of needle-like teeth. As I watched, frozen in horror, one of them opened its mouth and began to sing again. The sound was beautiful and terrible, a siren call that made my muscles go slack and my thoughts hazy. I found myself wanting to go to them, to let them take me wherever they wanted. With tremendous effort, I covered my ears and tore my gaze away. I had to keep moving. I scrambled to my feet and continued climbing, higher and higher up the mountainside. The night seemed to stretch endlessly, a nightmare from which I couldn't wake. I climbed until my fingers were bloody and my legs refused to carry me further. Finally, I found a small cave, little more than a crack in the rock face, and squeezed inside. Pressed against the cold stone, I listened for sounds of pursuit, but heard nothing except the hammering of my own heart. Had I lost them? Or were they waiting, patient as the mountains themselves, for me to emerge? I must have fallen into an exhausted sleep, because the next thing I knew, pale light was filtering into my hiding place. Dawn had come, bringing with it a tentative sense of safety. Sunlight was supposed to banish monsters, wasn't it? Cautiously, I crawled out of the cave and surveyed my surroundings. I was high up on the mountainside, with a panoramic view of the valley below. I could see Lemuel Lake, a sapphire gem nestled among the rocky slopes, peaceful and innocent in the morning light. There was no sign of the horrors I'd witnessed during the night. Had it all been a hallucination? A vivid nightmare brought on by exhaustion and isolation? Perhaps I'd been suffering from altitude sickness. Or maybe there had been something toxic in the wild mushrooms I'd added to my dinner. These rational explanations were comforting, and I clung to them as I made my way carefully down the mountainside. My gear was still at the campsite. If I could retrieve it, I could hike back to my car and leave this place behind. The descent was treacherous, but daylight made it manageable. As I approached my campsite, everything looked normal. My tent stood where I'd left it. My extinguished campfire was a circle of innocuous ashes, and my cooking gear was arranged neatly on a flat rock. But something was wrong. It took me a moment to identify what was bothering me. There was no sound, no birds singing, no insects buzzing, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. The forest was as silent as it had been during the night. As I approached my tent, I noticed something else. The ground around it was marked with strange indentations. Not quite footprints, but elongated depressions that reminded me of the tracks a seal might leave on a beach, dragging itself across the sand. My hand trembled as I reached for the tent zipper. I had to know if anything had been disturbed inside. The zipper made an obscenely loud sound in the silence as I pulled it down, inch by inch, revealing the interior of the tent. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, except for one thing. My sleeping bag was soaking wet, completely saturated as if it had been submerged. Water dripped from it onto the tent floor, forming a small puddle. I backed away from the tent, my heart racing again. This was real. Last night had been real, and the water babies, or whatever they were, had found my sleeping place. I needed to leave immediately. I grabbed only the essentials: water, energy bars, first aid kit, map, compass, and stuffed them into my day pack. Everything else could be replaced. As I slung the pack over my shoulder, I glanced toward the lake one last time. Its surface was mirror smooth, reflecting the blue sky and white clouds above. But as I watched, a ripple appeared at the center, spreading outward in concentric circles. I didn't wait to see what might emerge. I turned and hurried toward the trail that would take me back to civilization, back to the comforting solidity of asphalt and concrete and electric lights. The hike back should have taken several hours, but I made it in less than 2, driven by fear and adrenaline. I passed several groups of day hikers heading up the trail, their cheerful greetings and normal appearances momentarily reassuring me that I was back in the real world. But when one family, a father, mother, and 2 young children, told me they were planning to camp at Lamoille Lake for the night, I felt compelled to warn them. "I wouldn't camp there," I said, trying to keep my voice level, not wanting to sound like a madman. There's a problem with the water. Contamination. Probably best to find somewhere else." The father looked skeptical, but the mother glanced at her children and nodded. "Thanks for the warning. We'll find another spot." I hoped they would. I hoped they wouldn't dismiss my warning as the ravings of an inexperienced hiker, because as I continued down the trail, I could swear I heard it again, that distant melodic singing, following me out of the mountains like a half-remembered dream. When I reached my car, I threw my pack in the back seat and started the engine, not relaxing until I was on the highway back to Elko. I checked into a motel, took the longest, hottest shower of my life, and collapsed on the bed, expecting to sleep for hours. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those pale, elongated figures climbing toward me, their mouths stretched in those impossible grins. And in the quiet of the motel room, with the hum of the air conditioner as the only sound, I could still hear the singing, faint but unmistakable, like a radio playing in a distant room. On a hunch, I got up and went to the bathroom. I turned on the tap and watched water flow into the sink basin. The singing grew louder. I turned off the tap and backed away. The singing faded again, but didn't disappear completely. They were following me. Jeremiah had been right. They had marked me, and now they were following me through the water system, through pipes and plumbing that connected to streams that connected to rivers that connected, eventually, to Lamoille Lake. I checked out of the motel immediately, ignoring the clerk's confused questions. I drove through the night, stopping only for gas, and only at stations where I could pay at the pump without going inside, without approaching any water source. It's been 3 weeks since then. I'm back in San Francisco now, but I don't feel safe. I can't use the shower in my apartment. I've been going to the gym, using the shower there surrounded by other people. Safety in numbers, I tell myself. But sometimes, when it's quiet and I'm alone, I hear the singing. It comes from the kitchen sink, from the toilet, from the pipes inside the walls. And I know they're still there, still waiting, still wanting what only the living possess. Last night I woke to find my sheets damp, water dripping from my bed onto the floor. When I turned on the light, there was a wet handprint on my window. A handprint with too many fingers, each one too long, too jointed. I'm writing this as a warning. Stay away from Lamoille Lake in the Ruby Mountains. Stay away from the water there, especially at night. And if you ever hear singing, beautiful singing that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, run. Run to high ground, away from water. Because they're real, the water babies. And once they've marked you, they never stop hunting. My name is Michael Williams, and if you're reading this, I'm probably already gone, drawn down into the dark water, adding my voice to their endless, hungry chorus.